Shy employee leaves note on parked car. Boss can't resist and ends up falling in love with her. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the physical therapy clinic's parking lot as Callie Monroe gathered her belongings, preparing to head home. Her fingers brushed against the stack of perfectly arranged patient files on her desk, a small accomplishment in a day filled with quiet victories that nobody else would notice. She liked it that way, preferred it even. The less attention on her, the better. The clinic had emptied out, save for Dr. Peters finishing up with his last patient. Callie could hear their muffled voices through the wall, discussing exercise routines and recovery timelines. She used these final moments to straighten her workspace, aligning her pens in their holder and adjusting the position of her nameplate. Callie Monroe, reception. Running her fingers over the engraved letters, she allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't the nameplate of her dreams, the one she imagined reading Callie Monroe, owner above the door of a cozy cafe filled with the aroma of fresh pastries and coffee. But it was hers, a reminder that she had carved out this small, safe space for herself in the world. She reached up to adjust her coquet bun, securing a few loose curls that had escaped throughout the day. The familiar motion calmed her, a habit she'd developed years ago when she needed a moment to collect herself. Her reflection in the computer screen showed what everyone else saw, a young black woman with warm brown eyes and a gentle demeanor, perfectly suited to her role of greeting patients and managing schedules. What they didn't see were the encouraging notes she wrote to herself, tucked away in her desk drawer. Today's read, "You've got this. One step at a time." The words might seem simple, but they helped quiet the constant whisper of anxiety that accompanied her through each day. Gathering her oversized tan shoulder bag, chosen specifically because it could hold her emergency sweater, lunch container, and the paperback novel she never seemed to find time to read, Callie prepared to leave. She waved goodbye to Dr. Peters and his patient, keeping her voice soft and professional. "Have a good evening. Don't forget your exercise sheet." The cool evening air greeted her as she stepped outside, carrying with it the promise of early autumn. Callie loved this time of year, when the weather turned just crisp enough to justify the comfortable sweaters she used like armor against the world. She fumbled for her keys, thoughts already turning to the evening ahead. Maybe she'd finally try that new tea recipe she'd saved on her phone, or work on the business plan for her future cafe that she kept hidden beneath her bed. The screech of metal against metal shattered her reverie. Callie's heart stopped. Her hands froze on the steering wheel of her modest Honda Civic as she realized what had just happened. In her distracted state, she'd misjudged the distance while backing out, and her car had scraped against another vehicle, a sleek, charcoal-gray Audi that she'd never seen in the parking lot before. The sound of her rapid breathing filled the car as panic rose in her chest. Her first instinct was to flee, to pretend this hadn't happened, to avoid the confrontation that would inevitably follow. But beneath the fear, a stronger voice spoke up, the one that wrote those encouraging notes, the one that still dreamed of owning her own business someday. Deep breaths, she whispered to herself, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles paled. Do the right thing. With trembling fingers, she reached into her bag and pulled out her small notepad, the one she used to jot down appointment reminders and occasional snippets of cafe menu ideas. She clicked her pen several times, a nervous habit she'd never managed to break, before forcing herself to write, "Dear car owner, I am so sorry, but I accidentally scraped your car while backing out. I know this isn't how anyone wants to end their day. I work at the clinic as a receptionist and will gladly pay for any damages. My number is 555-324-7891. Again, I'm truly sorry for this. Callie Monroe." She read the note 3 times, checking for spelling errors or anything that might sound wrong. It felt too informal, too personal perhaps, but the thought of writing something colder made her even more anxious. This was who she was, someone who cared even when she made mistakes, especially when she made mistakes. Stepping out of her car, Callie approached the Audi to assess the damage. The scratch wasn't terrible, but it was definitely visible, a thin line of silver against the dark paint that made her wince. She secured her note under the windshield wiper, making sure it wouldn't blow away. As she drove home, her mind raced with possibilities. Who owned the car? Would they be angry? Would this affect her job? The questions tumbled over each other, threatening to overwhelm her. but she forced them back. She had done the right thing. That had to count for something. What Callie couldn't know as she headed home to what would surely be a sleepless night was that the owner of that Audi would find much more than just an apology note on his windshield. He would find the beginning of a story, their story. The next morning arrived with the weight of dread sitting heavy in Callie's stomach. She had arrived early, earlier than usual, partly because sleep had proved elusive and partly because she wanted to be prepared for whatever confrontation awaited her. She had dressed with extra care, choosing a knee-length floral dress in muted blues and browns, paired with a cream cardigan that felt like a protective embrace. She was organizing the day's files, color-coded and arranged by appointment time, when she heard footsteps approaching the reception desk. Taking a deep breath, she looked up. The man standing before her was not what she expected. Tall, with a clean-shaven head that somehow perfectly suited him, and a well-groomed beard that framed a face that managed to look both stern and intriguing. His blue eyes, startlingly intense behind simple wire-framed glasses, met hers with an unreadable expression. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep and measured. "So I'm Caleb Hartley, the new administrative manager." He paused, and Callie felt her heart skip several beats as he reached into his jacket pocket. "And I believe this is yours." Between his fingers was her note from yesterday, now slightly creased but carefully folded. Callie's fingers instinctively went to the pen on her desk, fighting the urge to click it repeatedly. "Mr. Hartley, I am so sorry about your car. I promise I'll pay for all the repairs, and I completely understand if you need to report this to—" "Mrs. Monroe," he interrupted, and something in his tone made her pause. Was that a hint of amusement? "I appreciate honesty above all else. And this," he held up the note, "was very honest." She watched as he carefully refolded the note and returned it to his pocket rather than disposing of it. The gesture struck her as oddly significant, though she couldn't say why. "We can discuss the details later," he continued, straightening his already impeccable collar. "For now, I need to familiarize myself with our filing system." His eyes fell to her perfectly organized desk. "Though it appears I'm in good hands." With that, he turned and walked toward his office, leaving Callie to process what had just happened. She released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her hand finally releasing its death grip on her pen. It wasn't until hours later, as she was processing the morning's insurance claims, that she realized something. Caleb Hartley hadn't seemed angry at all. In fact, unless she was imagining things, he had almost smiled when he mentioned her note. And for some reason she couldn't quite explain, that thought made her own lips curve into a small, secret smile. Caleb Hartley had a morning routine that never varied. Wake at 5:30 a.m., 5-mile run, shower, shave head, trim beard, black coffee, check emails. His life ran on the precise mechanics of habit and order, each action flowing seamlessly into the next like a well-oiled machine. But this morning, something was different. As he stood in his bathroom, methodically running the electric razor over his scalp, his eyes kept drifting to the note propped against his mirror. He'd placed it there last night, telling himself it was to remember to deal with the car scratch. Yet he'd already scheduled the repair for next week. The note served no practical purpose anymore. Still, he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. The handwriting caught his attention again, neat but with a slight nervousness to it, as if each letter carried the weight of its writer's anxiety. He'd never seen someone apologize so genuinely for an accident. In his experience, people usually defaulted to defensive explanations or tried to minimize their responsibility. But this note, this was different. Caleb adjusted his steel blue tie, frowning at his reflection. He was being ridiculous. It was just a note, just an accident, just a coincidence that the writer happened to be— His mind drifted to the way Callie Monroe had looked up at him yesterday, her warm brown eyes wide with concern, the way her fingers had nervously played with that pen. He'd noticed how her desk was organized, color-coded files arranged at perfect right angles, sticky notes aligned with geometric precision. It spoke of someone who cared about details, who took pride in doing things right. Someone like him. The thought followed him to work, persistent as a shadow. He arrived at 7:45 a.m., exactly as he had yesterday. But today, he found himself pausing in the parking lot, eyes drawn to the spot where their cars had met. The scratch on his Audi was barely visible unless you knew where to look. Yet it had changed something, set something in motion that he couldn't quite name. Inside the clinic, Callie was already at her desk. She wore a simple burgundy dress today, with a cream cardigan draped over her chair, practical but quietly elegant. Her hair was pulled back in neat braids, revealing the gentle curve of her neck as she bent over her work. "Good morning, Ms. Munro," he said, his voice carefully professional. She looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. "Good morning, Mr. Hartley." Her voice was soft but clear, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. He noticed how she straightened slightly in her chair, her hands automatically moving to align the papers on her desk. A nervous habit, perhaps, but one that mirrored his own need for order. "I've organized the quarterly reports by department," she continued, picking up a stack of folders, color-coded tabs for each section with summary sheets on top. She hesitated, then added, "I thought it might make your review easier." Caleb accepted the folders, noting how each tab was perfectly placed, how the papers inside were arranged with meticulous care. This wasn't just organization, this was artistry. "Very thorough," he said, and watched as the tiniest smile touched her lips before she looked down again. Throughout the morning, he found his attention repeatedly drawn to the reception area. He observed how Callie interacted with patients, her gentle efficiency, the way she remembered everyone's name, the small touches that made people feel at ease. When an elderly patient struggled with paperwork, she quietly offered help without making him feel dependent. When a mother arrived with a fussy toddler, Callie produced a small coloring book and crayons from her desk drawer, as if by magic. During his lunch break, Caleb retreated to the small break room, pulling out his usual protein bar and water bottle. He liked to use this time to review emails or plan his afternoon schedule. Instead, he found himself watching as Callie prepared her own lunch at the counter. She moved with the same quiet precision she brought to everything else, carefully arranging her meal on a small plate rather than eating from the container. A homemade sandwich, cut diagonally, an apple, sliced into even wedges, a tea bag steeped for exactly 3 minutes. He couldn't help counting. Without thinking, he asked, "What kind of tea is that?" Callie started slightly, as if surprised to be noticed. "Oh, it's chamomile with lavender," she replied, then added quickly, "Would you like some? I always bring extra bags." "No, thank you." The words came out more abruptly than he'd intended, and he saw her shoulders tense slightly. Cursing his awkwardness, he added, "But it smells nice." Her smile was brief but genuine, lighting up her face for just a moment before she retreated to her usual quiet demeanor. That afternoon, Caleb had his first staff meeting as administrative manager. He'd prepared a detailed agenda, complete with action items and timeline projections, but as he stood at the head of the conference table, he found his attention repeatedly drawn to Callie, who sat taking notes in her precise handwriting. She was the only one who wrote things down by hand instead of typing on a laptop or phone. Her pen moved steadily across the page, and he noticed how she used different colored inks to categorize information. Once, she looked up and caught him watching. The slight blush that colored her cheeks made him lose his place in his presentation. Later, reviewing the day's patient files, he discovered small sticky notes attached to certain folders, gentle reminders about patient preferences or special circumstances. "Mrs. Anderson prefers afternoon appointments due to medication schedule. Mr. Rodriguez needs Spanish forms, simple things that made everyone's job easier, but that most people wouldn't think to document." As the day drew to a close, Caleb found himself lingering in his office, watching through the glass partition as Callie prepared to leave. She had a routine too, straightening her desk, checking tomorrow's schedule, adjusting her cardigan. He recognized the comfort of ritual, the security of knowing exactly what comes next. But then she did something unexpected. Before leaving, she placed a small paper cup of coffee on his desk, steam rising gently from the surface. "You mentioned this morning that you missed your coffee break," she said softly, already backing toward the door. "Thoughts or not, I thought you might need this for the late meeting." Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving only the coffee and a lingering scent of lavender tea in the air. Caleb picked up the cup, noticing how she'd remembered he took it black. The gesture was small, probably meaningless, yet it disrupted his carefully ordered world in the most pleasant way possible. That night, for the first time in years, Caleb deviated from his evening routine. Instead of reviewing reports or planning for tomorrow, he found himself sitting at his desk, staring at a small note that should have been thrown away days ago. Finally, he opened his journal, a simple black notebook where he recorded his thoughts when they became too complex for mere mental organization. He wrote, "She colors her world in small kindnesses, as if leaving trails of light for others to follow. How long has it been since someone made me notice such things? Across town, in her small apartment, Callie sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by magazine clippings of cafe designs and menu ideas. But instead of working on her business plan, she found herself drawing tiny doodles in the margins of her notebook, precise geometric patterns that somehow reminded her of the way Caleb straightened his tie, the careful way he held himself, the unexpected gentleness in his voice when he'd thanked her for the coffee. She thought about how he'd kept her note instead of throwing it away, how he'd noticed her tea, her organization system, her color coding, how his presence made her both more nervous and more secure, like the feeling of wrapping herself in her favorite sweater on a cold day. Tomorrow, she decided, she would bring an extra tea bag to work, just in case he changed his mind. Neither of them realized it yet, but their carefully ordered worlds were about to become beautifully, wonderfully messy. And it all started with a note on a windshield, a small crack in the perfect routine that would eventually let the light pour in. The morning brought with it a steady autumn rain, turning the clinic's windows into streaming canvases of grey. Callie arrived early as usual, shaking droplets from her umbrella, her burgundy rain boots squeaking slightly against the freshly waxed floor. The sound made her wince. Any noise that drew attention felt like too much noise. She was surprised to find she wasn't the first one there. Through the glass walls of his office, she could see Caleb already at his desk, his broad shoulders bent over what appeared to be a stack of reports. He wore a charcoal sweater today instead of his usual button-down, and something about the casual elegance of it made her heart skip. The sight of him caused her to pause mid-motion, her hand hovering over the light switch. She'd been practicing what to say all morning during her drive, rehearsing casual ways to offer him tea without seeming too eager. Now, seeing him actually there, all her practiced phrases evaporated. Just then, he looked up. Their eyes met through the glass, and for a moment, neither moved. Then Caleb did something unexpected. He smiled. It was small, just a slight softening of his usually serious expression, but it transformed his entire face. Callie found herself smiling back before she could think better of it. Her fingers instinctively went to adjust her braids. She'd worn them down today, adorned with small wooden beads that made tiny clicking sounds when she moved. Another noise she'd been self-conscious about until she saw the way Caleb's eyes followed the movement. "Good morning," she managed, her voice carrying across the empty clinic. He stood, and she noticed he held something in his hand. "Good morning, Mrs. Monroe. I was hoping you'd arrive early." Her heart stuttered at his words. He'd been waiting for her. Caleb crossed the space between them with long, measured strides. Up close, she could smell his cologne, something subtle and clean, like cedar after rain. He held out what he'd been carrying, a manila envelope. "The insurance forms for the car repair," he explained. "I thought we could handle it directly, without involving the clinic's paperwork." "Oh," Callie fumbled with her shoulder bag, nearly dropping her umbrella. "Yes, of course. I have my information right here." She pulled out a folder. Violet, because she color-coded everything in her life, even her mistakes. "Actually," Caleb said, and was that uncertainty she heard in his usually confident voice, "I was thinking we could discuss it over coffee. The repair estimate isn't urgent, and I've noticed you bring your lunch most days." The invitation hung in the air between them, wrapped in layers of professional courtesy, but containing something more, something that made Callie's fingers tighten around her umbrella handle. "I'd like that," she heard herself say, amazed at how steady her voice sounded. "I mean, yes, that would be practical." To discuss the details, was she imagining the relief that flickered across his face? Before she could analyze it further, the front door chimed as the first patient of the day arrived. They stepped apart, the moment breaking like a soap bubble, delicate and iridescent and impossible to hold. Throughout the morning, Callie found her thoughts returning to their upcoming lunch meeting. She typed appointment reminders with unusual focus, trying to keep her mind from wandering to questions about where they would go, what they would talk about, whether this was really just about insurance forms. Around 10, she got her answer. A delivery man arrived with 2 paper cups from the local cafe. "For Mr. Hartley," he said. But moments later, Caleb appeared at her desk with both cups. "I thought we could save time by having coffee here," he said, placing 1 cup before her, "unless you'd prefer to go out." The disappointment must have shown on her face because he quickly added, "The cafe was my backup plan. I wasn't sure if you'd be comfortable leaving the desk during lunch hour." The consideration in that statement, the fact that he'd thought about her comfort, her responsibilities, made something warm bloom in her chest. "This is perfect," she said, and meant it. "Thank you." She watched as he lifted his cup, noticed how he held it with both hands as if savoring the warmth, a man who appreciated small comforts, despite his formal exterior. She filed that observation away with the others she'd been collecting, how he straightened papers while thinking, how his glasses slid down his nose when he read, how he always thanked the cleaning staff by name. "I ordered chai," he said, gesturing to her cup. "I noticed you prefer tea, but I thought—" "Chai is perfect," she interrupted, then blushed at her eagerness. "I mean, I love chai, especially on rainy days." Their eyes met over their cups, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, of how much attention they'd each been paying to the other's preferences. "About the car," Caleb began, then stopped as Callie reached for her violet folder. "Actually, I've already scheduled the repair. Insurance will cover most of it, but I should pay the deductible," she insisted. "It was my fault. The scratch was minor, hardly worth mentioning." He paused, seemed to wrestle with something internally, then added, "Though I'm glad you did. Mention it, I mean. Leave the note." The admission hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Callie took a sip of her chai to hide her smile, but she could feel Caleb watching her, noting her reaction. "I almost didn't," she confessed. "I was scared. I'm usually scared of, well, most things." The words came out before she could stop them, more honest than she'd intended. Instead of the judgment she feared, Caleb's expression softened. "Fear isn't always bad," he said quietly. "It means you care about doing the right thing, getting things right. Is that why you organize your paper clips by size?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. To her amazement, Caleb laughed, a rich, warm sound that she'd never heard before. "You noticed that?" "I noticed lots of things," and she admitted, then added more boldly, "like how you straighten your tie exactly 3 times before meetings, or how you write notes in blue ink, but sign everything in black." His eyes widened slightly behind his glasses. "And I notice how you color-code the patient files, but also match the colors to the days of the week. How you have a different cardigan for each type of weather. How you hide encouraging notes in your desk drawer." Callie's breath caught. "You saw those?" "Just glimpses," he assured her quickly. "I wasn't snooping. But sometimes, when you think no one's watching, you take them out and read them. They must be important. They remind me that I'm more than my fears," she said softly. "That someday I might be brave enough to—" She stopped, realizing she'd nearly mentioned her cafe dreams to her boss. But Caleb didn't press. Instead, he said, "I have something similar. A journal. I write down things I can't say out loud." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each absorbing the weight of these small confessions. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meaningful glances and brief interactions. When Caleb needed files, he lingered at her desk longer than necessary. When Callie delivered reports to his office, she found reasons to ask questions that could have been emailed. As evening approached, the rain had settled into a gentle mist. Callie was gathering her things when Caleb appeared at her desk one last time. "I'm glad we had coffee," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Even though we never actually discussed the insurance forms?" she asked, feeling unexpectedly brave. His lips curved into that small, transformative smile. "I will need another coffee for that, I suppose." It wasn't quite a question, but Callie answered anyway. "I'd like that." As she drove home through the misty evening, Callie realized she'd gone the whole day without clicking her pen or hiding behind her hair. Somehow, being noticed by Caleb made her feel less afraid of being seen. In his own car, Caleb was making a rare deviation from his route home. He pulled into the local office supply store, heading straight for the section with sticky notes and folders. Standing before the display of organizational supplies, he found himself smiling as he selected a pack of violet-colored tabs. Sometimes the biggest changes come disguised as the smallest gestures. A note on a windshield, a shared coffee, a confession about paper clips. And somewhere between the lines of their carefully ordered lives, something new was taking root, something neither of them had planned for, but both were beginning to welcome. It started with a sticky note. Callie arrived at work to find a small violet square attached to her computer monitor. The color exactly matched her filing system, and the handwriting was precise, measured, unmistakably Caleb's. "Your organization system saved me an hour of work yesterday. Thank you." "See?" She traced the letters with her fingertip. noting how he'd written it in blue ink, his note-taking color, not his signing color. This wasn't an official memo. This was something else entirely. Without overthinking it, she pulled out her own stack of sticky notes, pale green dye, the color she used for personal reminders. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, "Happy to help, though I notice you've started organizing your paper clips by size and color now. See." She waited until he was in a meeting before slipping into his office to place it on his keyboard. All morning she worried it was too forward, too familiar. But when Caleb returned and found the note, she caught the smile that crossed his face, the real one, not his professional mask. That afternoon, another violet note appeared on her water bottle. "Guilty as charged. But I learned from the best. Your color system is inspiring." The word inspiring had been written, erased and rewritten. She could see the slight indentation in the paper. He'd thought about his word choice, considered it carefully. The realization made her stomach flutter. Thus began their paper conversation, a private dialogue conducted in color-coded fragments throughout the week. Each note was small, insignificant on its own, but together they formed a bridge between their carefully maintained professional facades and the people they were beneath them. Green note: "You hum when you're reviewing reports. Always the same song." Beethoven's Ninth. Violet response: "My mother played classical music in her bakery. You recognize Beethoven?" Green: "Music minor in college. Another life." "You grew up in a bakery." Their notes grew longer, more personal. They began leaving them in unexpected places, tucked into file folders, balanced on coffee cups, slipped between pages of reports, each one a small thrill of discovery, a secret shared between them. One morning, Callie arrived to find a newspaper article about local small businesses paper-clipped to her desk calendar. A violet note accompanied it. "Noticed you reading cafe reviews during lunch. Dream of your own someday?" Her heart stopped. She'd been so careful to keep her cafe planning private, viewing it as a silly fantasy rather than a serious aspiration, but somehow Caleb had seen through her. That day, she took longer than usual to respond. Finally, during the afternoon lull, she wrote, "A small cafe bookstore, somewhere warm and welcoming, probably just a dream." She nearly threw it away 3 times before finally leaving it on his desk. When she returned from filing patient records, she found his reply, "Dreams that make you smile like that are never just anything." He'd noticed her smile. The thought followed her through the rest of the day, warming her like sunlight. Their notes became a daily ritual, as essential as morning coffee and color-coded files. Through them, they learned each other's stories in fragments and pieces. Caleb shared memories of piano lessons and business school, of choosing order as a way to make sense of chaos. Callie revealed bits of her childhood, helping in her mother's bakery, finding comfort in books and quiet corners. But it wasn't just notes anymore. Their interactions began to carry the weight of accumulated knowledge, of shared secrets and observed details. When Callie had a difficult phone call with an angry patient, she returned from lunch to find a cup of chamomile lavender tea on her desk, her comfort drink. She hadn't told him that. He'd noticed on his own. When Caleb had a particularly stressful budget meeting, she rearranged his afternoon schedule to give him a 15-minute buffer between appointments. He never mentioned it, but she saw how his shoulders relaxed when he checked his calendar. They developed a language of small gestures and subtle signals. A paperclip left askew meant rough day. A perfectly aligned stack of files translated to "I'm here if you need anything." They learned to read each other's moods in the angle of a sticky note or the color of an ink pen. One rainy Thursday, Callie was sorting through old patient files when she found a violet note tucked between folders. "Coffee at Riverside Cafe after work." Unless it's too forward. Her heart raced as she read the words again. This was different from their shared office coffee, their casual lunch meetings to discuss work. This was intentional, personal. She took a deep breath and wrote her reply on green paper. Not too forward, just forward enough. She watched through her lashes as he found the note, saw the way his hand moved to straighten his tie 3 times, his nervous tell. When he looked up and caught her watching, neither of them looked away. The afternoon crawled by with excruciating slowness. Callie changed her mind about going approximately 12 times. She rewrote 3 patient reports because she couldn't focus. Her pen-clicking habit returned with a vengeance until she forced herself to switch to pencils. At exactly 5:15 p.m., she heard Caleb's office door open. She kept her eyes on her computer screen, pretending to finish an email while actually typing random letters. then deleting them. "Ready?" His voice was soft, almost hesitant. She looked up to find him standing by her desk, his coat draped over one arm. He'd changed his tie. She noticed these things now, couldn't help noticing them. The new one was deep green, almost the exact shade of her sticky notes. The coincidence made her smile. "Ready?" she said, gathering her courage along with her belongings. The walk to Riverside Cafe was quiet but comfortable. The evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of approaching winter. Their shoulders didn't quite touch, but they walked close enough that Callie could feel the warmth radiating from him. Inside the cafe, away from the fluorescent lights and professional boundaries of the clinic, something shifted. Caleb's posture relaxed slightly, and Callie found herself talking more freely. They discussed books they'd read, music they loved, the way autumn light looked different from summer light. "Why did you keep it?" she asked suddenly. At his questioning look, she clarified, "My note, the one from the car. You kept it instead of throwing it away." Caleb was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in careful quarter turns. Finally, he said, "Because it was real. No excuses, no deflections, just honest regret and a genuine desire to make things right." He paused, then added softly, "Do you know how rare that is?" "About as rare as someone keeping a crumpled apology note like it means something," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. His eyes met hers over the rim of his cup. Maybe it did mean something. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Callie felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away. For once, she wanted to be seen, to be known. "Maybe it still does," she whispered. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting soft halos in the gathering dusk. Inside, two people who had built their lives around order and routine were learning that sometimes the best things in life arrive through beautiful accidents and unplanned moments. And somewhere in a desk drawer, a slightly crumpled note on a violet sticky pad waited to be discovered. Some of the best stories start with a mistake. I'm glad ours did. The first signs of winter had begun to dust the city with frost, turning morning commutes into exercises in careful navigation. Callie sat in her car outside the clinic, watching her breath cloud the windshield as she gathered her courage. In her lap lay a leather-bound notebook, a gift she'd spent 2 weeks working up the nerve to give Caleb. She'd found it in a small bookshop last weekend, its pages thick and cream-colored, with a subtle grid pattern perfect for someone who appreciated order. The cover was deep blue, like the tie he wore to important meetings. She'd agonized over whether it was too personal, too presumptuous, too much. But after their coffee date at Riverside Cafe, and yes, she'd finally admitted to herself that it was a date, something had changed. Their note exchanges had grown more frequent, more intimate. Their shared glances carried more weight. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Taking a deep breath, Callie grabbed her bag and the notebook, stepping carefully on the frosty pavement. The clinic's lights were already on. Caleb's car was in its usual spot, perfectly centered between the lines. The sight made her smile. Inside, she found him in the break room, preparing coffee with his usual precision. He looked up when she entered, and his face softened in that way that made her heart skip. "Good morning," he said, then gestured to a second cup on the counter. "I made tea, chamomile lavender." The fact that he'd anticipated her arrival, prepared her favorite tea. Callie felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with hot beverages. "Thank you," she said softly. Then, before she could lose her nerve, held out the notebook. "I got you something." Caleb's eyes widened slightly behind his glasses. He set down his coffee and accepted the gift with both hands, treating it with the same care he showed to important documents or precious things. "It's for your journal," she explained quickly, words tumbling out. "Since you mentioned writing things you can't say out loud, I thought maybe, but if it's too personal—" "It's perfect," he interrupted, his voice low and warm. His fingers traced the subtle grid lines on the pages. "You noticed I prefer gridded paper. I notice everything about you," she admitted, then blushed furiously at her own boldness. When she dared to look up, Caleb was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I know," he said softly. "I notice everything about you, too." The moment stretched between them, full of things unsaid but understood. Finally, Caleb cleared his throat and reached into his jacket pocket. "Actually, I have something for you as well." He handed her a carefully folded piece of paper, not a sticky note this time, but a full page torn from his old journal. Callie opened it with trembling fingers, recognizing his precise handwriting. There's a cafe for sale on Maple Street. Corner location, big windows, built-in bookshelves from its days as a bookstore. Needs work, but has potential. Like some of the best things in life, it's waiting for someone to see its true value. Below was printed information about the property, complete with photos. Callie's vision blurred as she realized what this meant. He'd been researching her dream, taking it seriously, seeing its potential just as he seemed to see hers. I drive past it on my morning runs, Caleb explained, his voice uncertain for the first time she could remember. When you mentioned wanting your own cafe, I thought you should know about it. Not that you have to do anything, I just wanted you to see the possibility. Callie stared at the paper, at the little cafe with its large windows and faded charm. It was nothing like the sleek modern places she usually saw in her research. Instead, it looked lived in, loved, full of stories, like the best kind of home. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to find bigger words for the emotions swelling in her chest. Their eyes met over their respective gifts, a journal for words too precious to speak, information about a dream too tender to share. In that moment, something shifted between them, as if the last walls of professional distance crumbled away. The spell was broken by the arrival of the morning cleaning crew. Callie and Caleb stepped apart, but something lingered in the air between them, a shared understanding, a promise of more to come. Throughout the day, they fell into a dance of meaningful glances and subtle gestures. When Caleb had a difficult phone call, Callie left a green sticky note on his desk. "Your patience with difficult people is remarkable, even when they don't deserve it." During the afternoon lull, she found his response in violet. "I learned patience waiting for the right moment, the right person. Some things are worth waiting for." Each interaction carried the weight of their growing connection. When Caleb needed files, his fingers brushed hers in the exchange. When Callie delivered reports, she lingered in his doorway, sharing observations about patients or staff that made him smile. During lunch, they sat together in the break room, not talking much but sharing comfortable silence. Callie noticed how Caleb had started bringing real lunches instead of protein bars. Today it was a sandwich that looked suspiciously similar to hers. "Are you copying my lunch choices now?" she teased, feeling brave in their shared solitude. His ears reddened slightly, but he met her eyes. "I'm learning to appreciate new things." The words carried more meaning than their simple surface, and Callie felt herself blushing again. She'd been doing that a lot lately, but somehow it bothered her less with Caleb. He made her feel like her reactions were charming rather than awkward. Late afternoon brought a rush of patients, keeping them both busy with their respective duties, but even in the chaos, they found ways to communicate. A coffee appeared on Callie's desk, just when she needed it most. Patient files were returned to Caleb with encouraging notes hidden between the pages. As evening approached, Callie found herself lingering over her closing duties, straightening things that were already straight, double-checking things she'd already verified. She wasn't ready for the day to end, for this new understanding between them to face the real world outside the clinic's walls. "Callie?" She looked up to find Caleb standing by her desk, his new journal held carefully in one hand. He'd used her first name, something he'd never done before. "Would you like to get dinner?" he asked, his voice steady, but his hand tightening on the journal. "To talk about the cafe on Maple Street or anything else?" The last two words held a universe of possibilities. Callie thought about all the reasons she should say no. Professional boundaries, workplace complications, her own fears and insecurities. But then she looked at Caleb, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made all those reasons seem small and distant. "Yes," she said simply, "I'd like that very much." As they gathered their things to leave, Callie noticed a final violet sticky note on her computer screen. "Some people organize their lives to keep chaos at bay. Others do it to create space for the right kind of chaos to enter. Thank you for being my beautiful disruption." She carefully peeled off the note and tucked it into her bag, next to her own growing collection of memories and possibilities. Outside, the winter sun was setting early, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, but inside, something warm and bright was just beginning to rise. Later that night, in his apartment, Caleb would open his new journal and write about brown eyes that saw through his carefully constructed walls, about the courage it takes to let someone rearrange your perfectly ordered world. And in her own apartment, Callie would look up properties on Maple Street, daring to imagine a future where dreams and reality might finally align. Sometimes the biggest steps forward come disguised as small gestures, a gifted journal, a shared piece of information, a first-name basis. And sometimes the most important words are the ones written not on paper, but in the spaces between heartbeats, in the silence between spoken thoughts, in the margins of ordinary days made extraordinary by the simple act of being noticed, understood, and gently or carefully loved. The restaurant Caleb chose was tucked away on a quiet street, its windows glowing warmly against the early evening darkness. Callie sat in her car, watching snowflakes dance in her headlights as she gathered her courage. She'd changed clothes after work, a deep purple sweater dress that made her dark skin glow, and her hair was loose for once, natural curls framing her face. Her phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. "I'm here whenever you're ready. No rush." The gentleness of those 3 words, "no rush," made her smile. He understood her need for time, for preparation, for the careful gathering of thoughts and feelings before stepping into new situations. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out into the light snow. Caleb was waiting by the restaurant door, and the sight of him made her pause mid-step. He'd also changed after work, dark jeans and a steel blue sweater that brought out his eyes. His beard was freshly trimmed, and something about seeing him in casual clothes made him seem more real, more accessible. "You look beautiful," he said quietly as she approached, then added with a small smile, "I mean, you always do, but different, good different." "You too," she managed, noting how he'd left off his glasses. Good different. Inside, the restaurant was cozy and intimate without being overwhelming. Soft lighting, well-spaced tables, the kind of place where conversations could flourish without being overheard. Callie wondered if he'd chosen it specifically with her comfort in mind. "I hope Italian is okay," Caleb said as they were seated in a quiet corner booth. "I remembered you mentioned your mother used to make fresh pasta at the bakery." The fact that he'd remembered that detail from one of their sticky note exchanges made warmth bloom in her chest. "It's perfect, though I'm surprised you didn't make a spreadsheet comparing all possible restaurant options." His laugh was soft but genuine. "Who says I didn't? I have it color-coded by cuisine, ambiance, and proximity to both our apartments." "Now you're just speaking my love language," she teased, then blushed at her choice of words. But Caleb's eyes softened as he looked at her across the table. "I know," he said simply. They ordered wine, a Merlot that Caleb selected with surprising knowledge, and fell into conversation that flowed as easily as their shared coffee breaks, but with a new layer of openness. "So tell me more about the bakery," Caleb said as they shared an appetizer of bruschetta. "What was it like growing up there?" Callie found herself sharing stories she rarely told anyone, about helping her mother knead dough before dawn, about the classical music that played constantly through old speakers, about falling asleep to the smell of fresh bread and the sound of her mother humming Beethoven. "That's where I learned to love order," she admitted. "So everything had to be precise, measurements, timing, temperature. One mistake could ruin an entire batch. But when everything came together perfectly," she smiled at the memory. "It was like magic." "Is that what you want for your cafe?" Caleb asked. "That kind of magic?" "Yes, but more. I want it to be a place where people feel safe being themselves, where quiet people can read without feeling pressured to socialize, where someone can spend 3 hours with 1 cup of tea and no one judges them." She ducked her head, embarrassed by her own passion. "Silly, right?" "No," Caleb said firmly. "It's not silly at all." He hesitated, then added, "I went to look at the Maple Street location yesterday." Callie's head snapped up. "You did? The bones are good. The plumbing and electrical are solid. Say it mainly needs cosmetic work. New paint, some repairs to the bookshelves, updated fixtures. Nothing structural." He paused. "The realtor said they're motivated to sell." "Caleb," she didn't know how to express what his interest in her dream meant to her. "I'm not trying to pressure you," he said quickly, "and I see how your eyes light up when you talk about it. So I think you could make it amazing." Their main courses arrived, handmade gnocchi for her, osso buco for him. They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments before Callie found the courage to ask something she'd been wondering. "Why did you keep my note?" "The real reason." Caleb set down his fork, considering. "Because it was the first time in years someone had surprised me in a good way. Everyone sees me as this completely ordered, controlled person. And I am that, mostly. But your note?" He smiled. "It was honest and messy and perfect, like a reminder that the best things in life don't always follow our careful plans." "Is that why you waited 2 weeks to ask me to dinner?" "Partly," he admitted. "I wanted to be sure I wasn't misreading things. that this wasn't just me projecting meaning onto sticky notes and shared coffee. "And now?" Callie asked softly. "Now I'm sure there's something here. Something real." His eyes met hers. "Something worth exploring if you want to. Even though it might complicate things at work, some complications are worth it." He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. "Besides, I have a spreadsheet for handling workplace relationship protocols too." She laughed, the tension breaking, and let her hand bridge the distance to meet his. His fingers were warm and strong, wrapping around hers with gentle certainty. They lingered over dessert, a shared tiramisu that Caleb insisted she choose, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his college days studying music before switching to business, about his secret love of jazz despite his classical training. She shared her dream of hosting poetry readings at her future cafe, of creating a space where art and comfort could coexist. When the check came, Caleb didn't make a show of insisting on paying, but simply handled it quietly while asking her opinion about hosting live music at the cafe. His consideration of her comfort, his way of making even potentially awkward moments feel natural, it all added to the growing warmth in her chest. Outside of the snow had stopped, leaving the world hushed and clean. They walked slowly to their cars, neither wanting the evening to end. "I had a wonderful time," Callie said, fighting the urge to fidget with her keys. "Me too." Caleb stepped closer, his presence warm in the cold night air. "Would you like to do this again? Maybe see the cafe on Maple Street together?" "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." He leaned down slowly, telegraphing his intentions, giving her time to step back if she wanted. Instead, she tilted her face up to meet him. When his lips touched hers, it was gentle and brief, a question more than a demand, a promise of more to come. "Good night, Callie," he murmured as he pulled back. "Good night, Caleb." In her car, before starting the engine, Callie found a violet sticky note tucked under her windshield wiper. The paper was slightly damp from snow, but the words were clear. Some people plan their whole lives carefully, never leaving room for surprise. "Thank you for being the most beautiful surprise of my life." She carefully added it to her collection in her purse, next to the cafe listing and all their other shared notes. Then she sent a text, "Thank you for dinner, and for seeing me, the real me." His response came quickly. "Thank you for letting me." "Sweet dreams, Callie." As she drove home through the quiet streets, Callie realized she hadn't clicked her pen once during dinner, hadn't hidden behind her hair, or apologized for taking up space. With Caleb, she was learning that being seen didn't have to be scary. Sometimes it could be the most wonderful feeling in the world. In his own apartment, Caleb opened his new journal, its pages still crisp and fresh. He began to write about brown eyes that sparkled when sharing dreams, about the way certain people could turn your carefully ordered world upside down in the most perfect way possible, about how sometimes the best plans are the ones you never made. And somewhere in the city, a little cafe on Maple Street waited, its windows dark but full of possibility, ready for dreams to take root and grow. Saturday morning found Callie standing in front of the cafe on Maple Street, her breath visible in the crisp winter air. The building looked different in daylight, more real, more possible, more terrifying. Its brick facade was weathered but solid, the large windows dusty but intact. Above the door, faded letters still spelled out, "Books and Brew," a ghost sign from its previous life. "What are you thinking?" Caleb's voice was soft beside her. He'd picked her up in his Audi, insisting that they should see the place together first before meeting the realtor later that afternoon. "That I'm crazy," she admitted, tugging at the sleeve of her cream sweater. It's huge, too huge. I can't possibly—" "Look again," he interrupted gently. "But this time, don't look at what it is. Look at what it could be." Callie took a deep breath and tried to see through his eyes. The morning light caught the beveled glass of the transom windows, creating tiny rainbows on the sidewalk. The corner location meant double exposure, perfect for natural light. And those built-in bookshelves she could glimpse through the windows. "I see fresh paint," she found herself saying. Warm colors, but not too dark. New lighting fixtures. Tables by the windows for people who like to watch the world go by. Armchairs in the corners for readers who want privacy. Caleb smiled, and she felt his hand slip into hers, warm despite the cold morning. What else? The counter would go there, where that old desk is. We could keep some of the original wood, refinish it, display cases for pastries, everything my mother taught me to bake, and the bookshelves. She squeezed his hand. We could organize them by genre, with color-coded markers. "We?" he asked softly. Callie's cheeks warmed despite the cold. I mean, I could. Unless... I'd like that, he said. Being part of your dream, if you want me to be. She turned to look at him then. This man who organized his life with such precision, but was willing to step into her uncertain dream. He wore casual clothes again, a charcoal sweater, dark jeans, a navy peacoat that made his blue eyes seem deeper. His freshly shaved head caught the morning light, and she noticed he'd trimmed his beard with the same care he brought to everything. I do want that, she said softly. But Caleb, the money, this is so much more than I have saved. Can I show you something? When she nodded, he pulled out his phone, opening a spreadsheet that made her smile despite her anxiety. Of course he had a spreadsheet. I've been running numbers, he explained. So with your savings, plus a small business loan which you'll easily qualify for with your credit score and business plan. It's doable. Tight for the first year, but doable. You researched all this. I like to be thorough. He glanced at her. Too much? No, she said, squeezing his hand. It's perfectly you. They spent the next hour walking around the building's exterior, Caleb pointing out the solid foundation, the new roof, all the things that made this more than just a pretty dream. Callie found herself making notes on her phone, ideas for layouts, color schemes, menu items. My mother's cinnamon rolls, she mused. People used to line up for them on Sundays. And her lavender shortbread. Tell me more about her, Caleb said as they settled on a nearby bench, sharing the thermos of coffee he'd brought. You don't talk about her much? Callie wrapped her hands around the warm cup. She was light, even when things were hard, and they often were. Running a small business alone, she found ways to make it magical. She'd play music while she baked, dance between the ovens, tell me stories about each recipe. She passed away 5 years ago. Heart attack, in the bakery she loved so much. Callie felt tears prick her eyes. I always thought we'd open a place together someday. After I got the courage, Caleb's arm slipped around her shoulders, pulling her close. She'd be proud of you, you know. For daring to dream this. You think so? I know so. He pressed a kiss to her temple. I see her in you. In the way you make the clinic warmer just by being there. How you remember everyone's preferences. How you turn ordinary moments into something special. Callie turned her face into his shoulder, letting a few tears fall. When she looked up, Caleb was watching her with such tenderness, it made her heart ache. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me. All of me. His kiss was gentle, tasting of coffee and possibility. When they parted, he brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Ready to see the inside. The realtor was already waiting when they arrived, keys jingling in her hand. As they stepped through the door, the musty air carried hints of the building's past. Old books, coffee beans, forgotten conversations. Inside, the space was larger than it appeared from outside. Dusty sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the potential that lay beneath years of neglect. The original hardwood floors were scuffed but solid. The bookshelves, built into the walls, reached nearly to the ceiling, their dark wood crying out for polish and care. Callie moved through the space in a daze, touching doorframes, testing floorboards, peering into the back room that would become the kitchen. Caleb followed with his usual quiet attention, asking the realtor practical questions about wiring and permits while making notes on his phone. In what would become the cafe's seating area, Callie closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She could almost hear it, the hum of conversation, the clink of cups, the soft rustle of turning pages. She could smell fresh bread and coffee, see afternoon light falling across open books. Callie? Caleb's voice brought her back to the present. What do you think? She opened her eyes to find him watching her with that soft expression that made her feel brave. I think this is it. This is my someday. His smile was bright enough to light up the dusty room. Then let's make it happen. After the realtor left, they stayed behind, sitting on the floor with their backs against a bookshelf, shoulders touching. Caleb pulled out his tablet, showing her the business plan he'd been developing. Not to pressure her, he explained quickly, but to prove it was possible. You really believe I can do this? She asked, looking at the careful projections and detailed timelines. I believe you can do anything, he said simply. But this, he gestured around the space, this is already yours. I can see it. Callie leaned her head on his shoulder, letting herself really believe it for the first time. Will you help me? Not just with the planning, but all of it. Every step, he promised. Though I draw the line at baking, I once burned instant coffee. She laughed, the sound echoing in the empty space, adding another layer to the building's history. "How does someone burn instant coffee?" "Very carefully and with great precision," he said seriously, then joined her laughter. Later, as they locked up the building, Callie paused on the threshold. "My mother used to say that a good bakery needs 3 things: warm bread, warm light, and warm hearts. And this place," she smiled, taking his hand, "it already has at least 1 warm heart. More than enough to start with." That evening, after dropping Callie at home with plans to meet for Sunday brunch, Caleb sat in his carefully ordered apartment and opened his new journal. On a fresh page, he wrote, "Today, I watched someone fall in love with a dusty old building, and I fell a little more in love with her. Some people collect things, books, records, memories. Callie collects dreams and makes them feel possible. She takes empty spaces and fills them with light. Today, she took another step toward her dream, and I realized something. Sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do for someone is not to build their dreams for them, but to show them how strong they already are, how ready they've always been." Across town, Callie added a new note to her collection, a violet sticky note Caleb had pressed into her hand as they said goodbye. "Some people spend their lives searching for magic. Others create it wherever they go. Thank you for showing me the difference." Outside the cafe on Maple Street, snow began to fall softly, dusting the old sign with new possibilities. Inside, dreams waited in the darkness, ready to bloom in the light of tomorrow's sun. Monday morning at the clinic felt different. Callie's desk was still organized with her usual precision, patient files still color-coded and perfectly aligned, but now there was a stack of loan applications tucked in her bottom drawer and property information hidden between her personal papers. The biggest change, though, was the way her heart jumped when Caleb walked in, looking impeccable in his dark suit, but wearing a tie that matched the exact shade of purple she used for her personal notes. It wasn't an accident. Nothing about Caleb was ever accidental. "Good morning," he said softly, placing a cup of tea on her desk. His fingers brushed hers as he passed, a touch so brief anyone watching wouldn't have noticed. "Just good morning," she replied, fighting a smile as she spotted the violet sticky note under her cup. "Some people brighten a room just by entering it. You brighten my whole world just by existing in it." Their professional facade remained intact throughout the morning. He was still Mr. Hartley in front of patients. She was still Ms. Monroe during meetings. But there were moments, stolen glances and hidden smiles, that made her pulse quicken. During the morning staff meeting, Callie took notes as usual, but found herself distracted by the way Caleb's hands moved as he spoke, remembering how those same hands had held hers as they explored her future cafe, how they had traced the old woodwork, pointing out its potential, how they had cupped her face when he kissed her goodbye on Sunday. "Mrs. Monroe," she started, realizing Caleb had asked her something about the scheduling system. "Sorry, yes. The new system will be implemented next week. I've prepared training materials for all staff." Her voice was steady, professional, giving no hint of her wandering thoughts. But when she glanced up, she caught the slight quirk of his lips, the knowing look in his eyes. He'd noticed her distraction. Of course he had. Caleb noticed everything. During lunch, they maintained their new normal, sharing the break room table, discussing work-related matters in professional tones. But under the table, his ankle rested against hers, a secret point of contact that made even mundane conversations feel intimate. "The loan officer called Guillaume," she said quietly when they were alone. "We have an appointment on Wednesday." His eyes softened at the "we," but his voice stayed practical. "When I've updated the business plan projections, we can review them tonight if you're free." "Your place or mine?" "Mine," he said. "I'll cook." She raised an eyebrow. "I thought you couldn't even manage instant coffee." "I've been practicing." His smile was both shy and proud. YouTube tutorials, very educational. The thought of Caleb, precise perfectionist Caleb, following cooking videos with the same intensity he brought to budget meetings, made her heart swell. The afternoon brought a rush of patience, keeping them both busy with their respective duties. But somehow, Caleb found moments to leave little notes where only she would find them. "In the supply closet, your organizational system makes even paperclips feel special. Between patient files, you handled that difficult patient with such grace. I'm in awe of your gentle strength." On her water bottle, "Remember to breathe. You've got this. All of it." Each note made her feel braver, more capable. She'd spent so long trying to be invisible, to avoid attention. Now being seen by Caleb made her want to shine brighter. At 5 o'clock, as the clinic quieted, Callie was gathering her things when Dr. Peters stopped by her desk. "Great work with the Thompson family today," he said warmly. "You know, you've seemed different lately, Callie. More confident, it suits you." She blushed, not knowing how to respond. But Caleb appeared just then, his timing impeccable as always. "Ms. Monroe's competence has always been one of our clinic's greatest assets," he said smoothly. "We are fortunate to have her." Dr. Peters nodded in agreement before heading out, leaving them alone in the quiet office. The moment he was gone, Caleb's professional mask softened. "That wasn't just professional courtesy," he said quietly. "You are extraordinary, Callie. I hope you're starting to see what I see." She stood, gathering her courage along with her bag. "Tell me, sir, what exactly do you see?" His eyes held hers, intense and sincere. "Someone who makes order out of chaos without diminishing its beauty. Someone who dreams in color-coded possibilities. Someone who makes me want to be worthy of her trust." "Caleb." She glanced around the empty clinic, then reached up to straighten his tie, the one that matched her notes. "You already are." His smile was tender as he covered her hand with his. "How's ready to go home and talk business plans?" "Will there be more than business plans?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "I hope so," he murmured, then added with mock seriousness, "I have a spreadsheet for that too." She laughed, the sound echoing in the empty clinic. "Of course you do." They walked to their cars together, professional distance maintained until they reached the parking lot. Then Caleb took her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and incredibly intimate. "Follow me home," he asked softly. "Always." At his apartment, Callie discovered that Caleb's cooking lessons had paid off. He'd managed a simple but delicious pasta dish that made her smile with pride. They spread loan documents and business plans across his dining table, laptops open to budget spreadsheets and renovation estimates. But as the evening wore on, the papers were pushed aside in favor of closer conversations. Callie found herself curled on his couch, her head on his shoulder, as they talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, future dreams, favorite books and songs. "I have something for you," Caleb said suddenly, reaching for his briefcase. He pulled out a folder, violet, of course, and handed it to her. Inside, she found detailed sketches of her cafe, not just floor plans, but actual artistic renderings showing cozy reading nooks, a gleaming counter, sunlight streaming through polished windows. Along the margins were notes in his precise handwriting, "Space for poetry readings here," and "Perfect spot for your mother's photo," and "Our morning sun hits these tables first." "Caleb?" She traced the drawings with trembling fingers. "These are beautiful." "So I didn't know you could draw." "Another remnant of my artistic past," he admitted. "I used to sketch music notes in the margins of my business textbooks. Drove my professors crazy." "Thank you," she whispered, leaning up to kiss him softly, "for making my dreams feel real." He pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her curls. "They were always real. I'm just helping you see them clearly." Later, as they reviewed loan documents one last time, Callie noticed how their organizational styles had begun to merge, her color coding mixed with his precise spreadsheets, her intuitive flow complementing his structured approach. "We make a good team," she said softly. "The best," he agreed, then added with a smile, "though we still need to work on my baking skills." "One step at a time," she laughed. "Let's master coffee first." As they said goodnight at his door, Callie felt something settling in her chest, a certainty she'd never known before. This man, with his careful plans and tender heart, was becoming as essential to her dreams as the cafe itself. On her drive home, she found one last violet note tucked in her bag. "Some people plan for every contingency, trying to control the future. You taught me that the best plans are the ones that leave room for magic. Thank you for being the magic in my carefully planned life." She added it to her growing collection, each note a testament to their evolving story. Tomorrow they would return to their professional roles at the clinic, maintaining their careful balance of propriety and hidden tenderness. But now every interaction was colored with the knowledge of what lay beneath, dreams taking shape, hearts aligning, and a future being planned with both precision and wonder. The rejection letter from the bank sat on Callie's desk like a physical weight. She'd read it 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. Insufficient collateral, limited business experience, high-risk investment in current market conditions. Outside her apartment window, rain pounded against the glass, matching her mood. She'd been so careful with the application, had triple-checked every number, included every possible document. Caleb had reviewed it all, his business expertise making the plan seem foolproof. But it hadn't been enough. Her phone buzzed with another text from Caleb, the fifth one she hadn't answered. She knew she was being unfair, knew he was probably worried. But right now, she couldn't bear to hear his optimistic solutions or see his unwavering faith in her, not when she felt like such a failure. A knock at her door made her jump. She already knew who it would be. Only one person would brave this storm to check on her. When she opened the door, Caleb stood there, rainwater dripping from his coat, his blue eyes filled with concern. He held a paper bag that was somehow perfectly dry despite the weather. "You forgot something at the clinic," he said softly. "Ugh, what?" He reached into the bag and pulled out her collection of sticky notes, all the ones he'd written her over the past months, carefully preserved in a small box she kept in her desk drawer. "Your courage," he said, "your dreams, your magic." Tears welled in her eyes as he continued. "You left early, didn't even color-code tomorrow's files." His attempt at humor was gentle. "I knew something was wrong." "The bank," her voice cracked. "I know. I saw the letter." He stepped inside, closing the door against the storm. "Can we talk about it?" She nodded, letting him guide her to the couch. He set the bag down and shrugged off his wet coat, revealing one of her favorite sweaters underneath, the steel blue one that made his eyes shine. "It's not just the rejection," she said finally, staring at her hands. "It's, what if they're right? What if I'm not ready? What if I'm being stupid and thinking I could—" "Stop." His voice was firm but gentle. "Look at me, Callie." She raised her eyes reluctantly to meet his. "Do you remember what you said when you first saw the cafe? Not the fears or doubts, but the dreams. Tell me again." "Caleb, please." She took a shaky breath. "I saw warmth, light streaming through the windows, books everywhere, the smell of fresh bread and coffee, people feeling safe, welcome. Like my mother's bakery, but mine, my own kind of magic. That's still there," he said. "One bank's rejection doesn't change who you are or what you can create." He pulled her closer, letting her bury her face in his shoulder. "And it definitely doesn't change how I see you. How do you always know the right thing to say?" She felt his smile against her hair. "I have a spreadsheet for that too." Despite herself, she laughed. Then, pulling back to look at him, "I'm sorry I didn't answer your texts. Don't be... Everyone needs space sometimes." He touched her cheek gently. "But you don't have to face the hard moments alone anymore. That's what I'm here for. Even when I'm being ridiculous. Especially then." His eyes turned serious. "And Callie, you're not being ridiculous. This matters. Your dreams matter." She leaned into his touch, letting his certainty wash over her. "What do we do now?" "First, we eat." He reached for the bag he'd brought, pulling out containers. "I made dinner." "You cooked? In this weather?" "Actually," he looked slightly embarrassed. "I've been practicing this recipe for weeks. Was going to surprise you after we got the loan approval, but..." He shrugged. "Seemed like you needed it more tonight." Opening the containers, Callie gasped. Inside was her mother's signature dish, chicken marsala with homemade pasta. The aroma brought instant tears to her eyes. "How did you—" "Found the recipe in your mother's old notebook, the one you keep in your desk. Hope you don't mind. I wanted to learn something that mattered to you." She kissed him then, tasting the rain on his lips, hoping he could feel everything she couldn't put into words. "After dinner," he said when they parted, "we'll look at other options. There are other banks, private investors, different approaches we haven't considered. But right now," he pulled her close again, "right now, we just breathe." They ate on her couch, the storm raging outside while they created their own pocket of warmth within. Caleb's cooking wasn't perfect. The pasta was slightly overcooked, the sauce a bit too thick, but it was made with such care that it tasted better than any restaurant meal. As they finished, Caleb pulled out his ever-present journal. "I've been thinking," he said, opening to a fresh page, "what if we approach this differently? Instead of one large loan, we could look at smaller funding sources. Combine traditional financing with modern options." Callie watched as he began sketching out a new plan, his precise handwriting filling the page. Even in this, he brought both structure and heart, each number carefully considered. Each option weighed not just for financial viability, but for how it would impact her dream. "See here?" He pointed to a section of calculations. "We could start smaller, phase the renovations. Keep the bookstore portion minimal at first, focus on the cafe elements, then expand as we grow." "We?" she asked softly. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Yes, we. If If that's what you want, what about the clinic? I've been thinking about that too. He turned to a new page in his journal. I could reduce my hours there, work part-time while helping you get the cafe established. Doctor. Peters already mentioned wanting to restructure the administrative role. The fact that he'd thought this through, had already begun planning ways to support her dream while maintaining their professional lives, it made her heart swell. You'd do that. Change your whole life for this. For you, he corrected gently, and for us. Besides, his smile turned playful. Someone needs to keep the spreadsheets organized. Later, as the storm began to ease, they sat together on her small balcony, watching the rain taper off. Callie was wrapped in one of her cardigans, Caleb's arm warm around her shoulders. "Tell me something true," she said softly, an echo of their early coffee conversations. He was quiet for a moment, his hand tracing patterns on her arm. "I've never been good at uncertainty. My whole life has been about control, about planning for every possibility." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But watching you chase your dreams, even when it's scary, it makes me braver too." She turned to face him, seeing in his eyes everything he wasn't saying. His own fears, his own dreams, his absolute certainty that they were better together than apart. "Another truth," she offered. "I'm still scared, but not of failing anymore. I'm scared of how right this feels. You, the cafe, all of it. Like everything in my life was just preparation for this moment. Good scared. The best kind." They sealed this truth with a kiss, soft and sure, tasting of shared dreams and promises kept. When they parted, Caleb pressed something into her hand, a violet sticky note that read, "Some people see obstacles as endings. You see them as part of the story. Thank you for teaching me that the best dreams are worth fighting for, and the best love makes you brave." Above them, the clouds began to part, revealing stars in the rain-washed sky. Tomorrow they would face the practical challenges, new loan applications, alternative funding sources, revised business plans. But tonight, they simply held each other, two people who had found in each other the perfect balance of order and magic, of planning and dreaming, of strength and softness. And somewhere in the city, a little cafe on Maple Street waited patiently, its windows dark but full of promise, ready for dreams that wouldn't be deterred by one rainy night or one bank's rejection, ready for two hearts that had learned to be brave together. 3 months later, spring sunlight streamed through the newly cleaned windows of the cafe on Maple Street. Callie stood in the center of the space, surrounded by the controlled chaos of renovation, drop cloths covering refinished floors, the smell of fresh paint lingering in the air, stacks of books waiting to find their homes on the restored shelves. She held her morning coffee in one of the sample mugs they'd chosen together, deep purple with a matte finish, perfectly sized for cold mornings and warm hearts. The logo on it was still just a prototype, noted, "Books and Brew," in elegant script, with a small sticky note design in the corner. The electrician just finished the pendant lighting installation. Caleb's voice came from behind her, followed by his arms wrapping around her waist. "Shall I write on schedule?" Of course it was on schedule. Everything in their renovation had proceeded according to Caleb's meticulously planned timeline, color-coded and broken down into manageable phases. After the first bank's rejection, he'd helped her restructure the entire approach. Smaller initial loan, phased renovations, and a carefully curated combination of private investors who believed in her vision. "Have I thanked you today?" she asked, leaning back against him. "Only 3 times. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But who's counting?" You count everything, not everything," he murmured. "Some things defy spreadsheets." She turned in his arms to face him, taking in the sight of him in worn jeans and a paint-splattered t-shirt. Gone was the formal office attire, at least for now. He'd transitioned to part-time at the clinic, dedicating his remaining hours to helping her bring the cafe to life. "Like what?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Like the way you light up when you talk about this place, or how proud I am watching you build your dream, or how much I love—" The sound of the front door opening interrupted his words. They stepped apart as Dr. Peters entered, carrying a large wrapped package. "Sorry to interrupt," he said with a knowing smile, but this arrived at the clinic for Callie. Seemed important. Callie accepted the package, recognizing her mother's old address label still stuck to the brown paper. Her aunt must have finally found the box she'd promised, the one with her mother's old recipes and cafe photos. "Thank you for bringing it," she said warmly. "Would you like a tour of the progress?" "I would love one." Dr. Peters looked around appreciatively. Though I must say, the clinic isn't the same without you both there full-time. Patient files are a mess. I left very detailed instructions, Callie protested. With color coding, Caleb added, and a spreadsheet, they said in unison, then laughed. Dr. Peters shook his head fondly. You two really are perfect for each other. After the tour and Dr. Peters' departure, Callie sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully unwrapping her mother's package. Caleb joined her, their shoulders touching as she lifted out stacks of handwritten recipes and faded photographs. Look, she said softly, holding up a photo. This was opening day at her bakery. The image showed a younger version of her mother, standing proudly in front of a small storefront, her smile radiant. Callie felt tears prick her eyes as she noticed details she'd forgotten, the yellow curtains in the windows, the hand-painted sign, the way her mother's apron had always been slightly dusted with flour. You have her smile, Caleb observed gently, the kind that makes people feel at home. Callie leaned into him, drawing strength from his steady presence. I wish she could see this. See us. She does. He picked up one of the recipe cards, its edges worn with use. She's here in every recipe you'll bake, every tradition you'll carry on, every person you'll make feel welcome. He paused, then added softly, just like you did with me. She looked at him questioningly. That first note on my windshield, he explained. It wasn't just an apology, it was an invitation to step out of my carefully ordered world and into something real, something wonderfully, beautifully imperfect. Callie touched his face and rough with evening stubble. And you accepted. Best decision I ever made. He turned to kiss her palm. Though I still have the spreadsheet analyzing all possible outcomes. Of course you do, she laughed, then grew serious. We're really doing this, aren't we? Opening in 2 weeks. According to the timeline, Caleb, he smiled, understanding her need for reassurance rather than facts. Yes, love, we're really doing this, and it's going to be amazing. Standing, he pulled her to her feet and led her to the front window. The evening sun painted the street in golden light, catching the new lettering they'd finished yesterday. Through the glass, they could see their reflection overlaid on the space, their future self-imposed on their present. Close your eyes, he instructed softly. Tell me what you see. Callie closed her eyes, letting her other senses fill in the picture. Fresh coffee and warm bread, classical music playing softly, Beethoven's Ninth, your favorite, books everywhere, waiting to be discovered, comfortable chairs where people can read for hours, a counter with display cases full of my mother's recipes. And you, she said, opening her eyes to meet his gaze in the window's reflection. Always you. He turned her to face him, his blue eyes intense. I was going to wait until opening day, but he reached into his pocket and pulled out a violet sticky note, pressing it into her hand. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it to read. Some people spend their lives looking for a place to belong. I found mine the moment you left a note on my windshield. Marry me. Callie looked up to find him holding a small box with a simple, elegant ring, a sapphire instead of a diamond, the same deep blue as his eyes. I know it's fast, he said quickly, and we can wait as long as you want. But I've run every possible scenario through every spreadsheet I could create, and they all lead to the same conclusion. I want to spend my life organizing your chaos and watching you turn ordinary moments into magic. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, words failing her for once. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly. Of course it did. Caleb would have found a way to calculate her ring size from the way she held her pen. Their kiss tasted of coffee and possibilities, of dreams shared and challenges faced together. When they parted, Callie pulled out her own sticky note, green, naturally, and wrote, Some people plan their whole lives, others live by chance. We found the beautiful space in between, where love turns plans into adventures. Yes, 1,000 times yes. 2 weeks later, Noted Books and Brew opened its doors for the first time. The shelves were filled with carefully organized books, each section color-coded. The display cases held perfect recreations of her mother's recipes. The walls featured rotating works by local artists, and a small stage in the corner waited for poetry readings and acoustic sets. But the heart of the cafe was a small frame by the register, containing 2 sticky notes, one violet, one green, and a slightly crumpled apology note that had started it all. Below it, a small plaque read, The best love stories start with a mistake and end with a miracle. Welcome to our miracle, C&C. And in the years that followed, countless customers would comment on the cafe's perfect blend of order and warmth, never knowing that it wasn't just a business model. It was a love story written in color-coded notes and careful plans, in shared dreams and coffee cups, in the space between what we plan and what we discover. After all, sometimes the best things in life come not from perfect organization or complete spontaneity, but from learning to dance between the two, from finding someone who makes your chaos feel like order and your order feel like magic. And sometimes, just sometimes, it all starts with a note on a windshield. 1 year later, the early morning light filtered through the windows of Noted, casting warm patterns across the polished wooden floors. Callie moved through the quiet cafe, straightening chairs and adjusting books with practiced ease. Her wedding ring, the sapphire that matched Caleb's eyes, caught the light as she worked, sending tiny blue reflections dancing across the walls. The sound of keys in the back door made her smile. Right on schedule. "You're here early," Caleb said, entering with 2 travel mugs, coffee for him, lavender tea for her. Even after a year of marriage and successful cafe ownership, some routines never changed. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, accepting her tea. Too excited about today. Today marked not just their first anniversary as cafe owners, but also the launch of something special, a wall they'd designated for customers to leave their own notes, sharing their stories and dreams. It had been Caleb's idea, inspired by how their own love story began. "So everything's ready?" he asked, though she knew he'd triple-checked all preparations the night before. "Perfect," she assured him, though someone reorganized the mystery section by author height instead of last name. His ears reddened slightly. "I may have gotten carried away with the new shelving system." Laughing, she reached up to straighten his tie, dark purple today, matching their cafe's color scheme. Some things hadn't changed. He still dressed impeccably, even though he now split his time between the clinic's administrative work and cafe management. The only difference was that now his precise organizational skills were applied to inventory spreadsheets and recipe cataloging. "The first note is ours, and right?" he asked, pulling out a familiar violet sticky pad. Together, they approached the empty wall. A small plaque above it read, "Leave a note, share your story." Below was their framed original, the windshield apology that had started everything. Callie watched as Caleb wrote in his neat handwriting, "To everyone seeking their own kind of magic. Sometimes the best stories start with a mistake. Sometimes love looks like sticky notes and color-coded dreams. Sometimes home is a person, not a place. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's both." She added her own green note beside his. "Welcome to Noted, where every cup of coffee comes with a story, and every story has a home." As they stepped back to admire their handiwork, the morning sun fully illuminated the cafe's front windows. Through the glass, they could see their regular customers already lining up. The college student who spent hours reading in the corner, the elderly couple who came for morning chess and cinnamon rolls, the young writer who claimed their coffee fueled her best chapters. "Ready?" Caleb asked, his hand finding hers. Callie squeezed his fingers, remembering all the moments that had led them here: a scratched car, shared coffee breaks, secret notes, and brave decisions. She thought of her mother's recipes now bringing joy to new people, of the poetry nights that filled the cafe with words and music, of the quiet mornings like this one, when she and Caleb moved in perfect sync, building their dream together. "Ready?" she said softly. As they moved to open the doors, Callie spotted one last note on her desk, violet paper tucked beneath her daily planner. "Some people search their whole lives for success. I found mine the moment I stopped looking for perfection and started looking for you. Happy anniversary, my beautiful disruption. Love, C." And beneath it, in her own green sticky note, "Some people plan for every possibility. I'm just grateful none of your plans included what to do when someone scratched your car. Love always, C." Outside, the city was waking up. Inside Noted, another day of stories was about to begin. And in the space between planning and chance, between order and chaos, between 2 sticky notes on a wall, love continued to write its own perfect story. The end. If you could leave a note on the Noted cafe wall, what would be the most meaningful message you'd like to share? Something about love, dreams, new beginnings, or that special moment that changed your life. Imagine you're sitting in one of the cafe's comfortable armchairs with a steaming cup of your favorite drink, looking at that mural full of stories. What would your contribution be to this collection of memories? Your participation in the channel is very important. She was innocent and pure, but she ran away from home and ended up in the arms of an unknown man. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew running away wouldn't fix anything, but staying felt like drowning. The fluorescent lights in the Greyhound station buzzed with the same monotonous hum that had followed Lace Ellis for the past 18 hours. Her fingers traced the crack running down her phone screen, a spiderweb of damage that seemed to mirror everything else in her life. The bus to Atlanta had been cramped, filled with strangers whose stories she'd never know, but somehow their silent presence felt less suffocating than the house she'd left behind in rural Georgia. 25 years old, and she was starting over with nothing but a backpack stuffed with wrinkled clothes, her grandmother's silver bracelet, and $17 in crumpled bills. The weight of depression sat heavy on her chest, familiar as an old coat she couldn't take off, no matter how warm the weather got. Her mother's last words still echoed in her mind. "You're just like your father, always running when things get hard." The accusation had cut deeper than intended, mainly because Lice feared it might be true. The city smelled different than home, exhaust fumes mixed with food trucks and the faint scent of rain on concrete. People moved with purpose here, their faces buried in phones, earbuds blocking out the world. Lies envied their certainty, their sense of direction. She pulled her hoodie tighter and opened Spotify, letting a melancholic playlist wash over her as she walked toward downtown. The apartment she'd found online was everything the listing had promised: small, affordable, and available immediately. What it hadn't mentioned was how the walls seemed to breathe with the sounds of neighboring lives. Arguments, laughter, someone practicing violin at odd hours. Her roommate, Destiny, was already there when she arrived, leaving dishes in the sink and makeup scattered across the bathroom counter like she was marking territory. "You're the Georgia girl, right?" Destiny barely looked up from her phone. "Rent's due on the 1st. Don't touch my stuff in the fridge." Lias nodded, too tired for conversation. Her room was barely larger than a closet, with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. She sat on the thin mattress and opened Instagram, scrolling through carefully curated lives that made her feel even smaller. Everyone seemed to have figured out some secret she'd missed: how to be happy, how to belong, how to make life look effortless. 3 weeks later, she'd settled into a routine that felt like sleepwalking. The administrative job at Hartwell and Associates was exactly as soul-crushing as expected. 8 hours of data entry, answering phones, and pretending to care about quarterly reports while her boss, Mr. Richardson, treated her like furniture that occasionally spoke. Her days blended together: instant coffee, bus rides where she stared out rain-streaked windows, lunch eaten alone while watching TikTok videos of people half her age living lives that sparkled with possibility. The depression wrapped around her like fog, making everything seem muted and distant. Saturday morning found her at the corner coffee shop, the one place that felt remotely like home. The barista, a girl with purple hair and kind eyes, always remembered her order: medium coffee, extra cream, no sugar. Lias appreciated not having to explain herself here. She was scrolling through job listings on her cracked screen, hoping to find something that paid more than survival wages, when she stood up too quickly. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, its contents arcing through the air in what felt like slow motion. The hot liquid splashed across a stranger's white t-shirt, and Lias felt her face burn with embarrassment. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. He looked up, and she forgot whatever apology was forming on her lips. His eyes were the color of warm honey, and instead of anger, she saw something unexpected: understanding. "Hey, it's okay," he said, his voice gentle. "These things happen." As he reached for napkins, Lias noticed the guitar case leaning against his chair, covered in stickers from places she'd never been. Something stirred in her chest, not quite hope, but maybe its distant cousin. She had no idea that this clumsy moment would change everything she thought she knew about love. Sometimes the most beautiful connections begin with the messiest accidents. Cale Sumner had learned to read people's faces quickly. It came with the territory of playing music in subway stations and coffee shops. The young woman standing before him, her dark skin flushed with embarrassment, wore the same expression he'd seen in his own mirror countless mornings: someone carrying invisible weight. "I'll pay for dry cleaning," Lice stammered, fumbling through her small purse with shaking hands. "I'm so sorry, I'm having one of those weeks where everything I touch falls apart." He watched her count crumpled dollar bills, and something in his chest tightened. "Seriously, don't worry about it. It's just a shirt. He pulled off the coffee-stained fabric, revealing a faded band t-shirt underneath. See? Problem solved. The purple-haired barista appeared with a towel and a knowing smile. Kyle, honey, maybe this is the universe telling you to finally replace that raggedy old thing. Thanks for the fashion advice, Maya. He grinned, then turned back to Lais. I'm Kyle, by the way, and you're having a rough week. Lais hesitated, clutching her phone like a lifeline. I'm Lais and, yeah, you could say that. New city, new job, new everything. I'm still figuring out how to not trip over my own feet. Atlanta can be overwhelming at first. I moved here 3 years ago with nothing but this guitar and a lot of naive optimism. He gestured toward his case, decorated with stickers from venues that had long since forgotten his name. Some days I'm still figuring it out. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe relief at finding someone who understood the weight of starting over. You're a musician. I try to be. Reality says I'm a delivery guy who plays music in his spare time. Cale's laugh held no bitterness, just the weary acceptance of someone who'd made peace with his struggles. But hey, the bike keeps me in shape, and I get to see the city from a different angle. Maya refilled Lai's coffee without being asked, a small kindness that didn't go unnoticed. Lais wrapped her hands around the warm cup like it was an anchor. So what kind of music? She asked, and Kyle caught something in her voice, genuine curiosity, not just polite conversation. Folk, indie, whatever pays the bills, songs about real life, you know, the messy, imperfect stuff that most people don't want to talk about. He studied her face, noting how she seemed to lean in slightly. What about you? What brings you to our chaotic little corner of the world? Lais's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Still waiting for you to call me back. She quickly turned it face down, but not before Cale caught the shadow that crossed her features. Just needed a change, she said quietly. Sometimes staying in the same place feels like drowning in slow motion. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken truth. Cale recognized that particular brand of pain, the kind that came from families who loved you, but didn't know how to show it without causing damage. I get that, he said softly. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave everything familiar behind. They fell into comfortable silence, watching Saturday morning Atlanta wake up outside the coffee shop windows. Delivery trucks rumbled past, joggers in bright athletic wear navigated cracked sidewalks, and somewhere in the distance, church bells reminded everyone that it was the weekend. Can I ask you something? Lais said suddenly. Do you ever wonder if you made the right choice? Leaving everything behind, I mean. Kyle considered this, absently strumming silent chords on his thigh, every single day. But then I remember that the alternative was staying somewhere I couldn't breathe. At least here, when I mess up, it's my mess to clean up. Lais smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her entire face, chasing away some of the sadness that seemed to follow her like a shadow. I should probably get going, she said, glancing at her cracked phone screen. I have groceries to buy and a very judgmental roommate to avoid. Wait. Cale pulled out his own phone, fingers hovering over the keyboard. This might be forward, but would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime, when you're not accidentally throwing it at strangers? For a moment, Lais looked like she might say no. Her fingers twisted the strap of her purse, and Cale could practically see her talking herself out of taking a chance. I'm not very good at this, she admitted. Making friends, I mean, or whatever this is. Neither am I, Kyle said honestly. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we can figure it out together. She handed him her phone to input his number, and their fingers brushed briefly. A moment so small it might have been nothing or everything. As she walked away, Lais didn't know that the man with honey-colored eyes was about to become her reason to believe in tomorrow. The best conversations happen when the world is asleep and your guard is down. 3 days passed before Lais found the courage to text Kyle. She'd typed and deleted dozens of messages, each one feeling either too eager or too distant. Finally, at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, while lying on her thin mattress listening to Destiny's loud phone conversation through the paper-thin walls, she sent something simple. Is it weird that I still smell coffee when I think about Saturday? His response came faster than expected. Only if it's weird that I've been carrying a clean shirt everywhere, just in case I meet another coffee assassin. Lais found herself smiling at her cracked phone screen, the first time she'd smiled all week. Her job at Hartwell & Associates had been particularly soul-crushing. Mr. Richardson had spent Monday lecturing her about proper filing techniques, as if organizing other people's paperwork was some sacred art she'd failed to master. Tuesday brought a pile of invoices that seemed to multiply when she wasn't looking, each one a reminder of how small her world had become. Coffee assassin, that's definitely going on my resume under special skills, she typed back. So right below. Can make grown men cry with her aim, I assume. Their conversation flowed easily after that, meandering from coffee disasters to favorite songs to the weird noises Atlanta makes at night. Kyle told her about his delivery route, how he'd learned the city's rhythm through its streets, the morning rush that felt like controlled chaos, the afternoon lull when shadows grew long between buildings, the evening surge of people eager to get home to their real lives. "What's your favorite song right now?" he asked around midnight. Lais hesitated. Her current playlist was embarrassingly melancholic, all slow piano and voices that understood sadness. She'd been listening to Phoebe Bridgers on repeat, finding comfort in lyrics that articulated feelings she couldn't name. "You'll judge me," she typed. "Try me." Motion Sickness by Phoebe Bridgers. It's sad girl music. Phoebe Bridgers is brilliant. Have you heard her cover of Summer's End? It'll destroy you in the best way. Relief flooded through her. No judgment, no suggestion that she listened to something more upbeat, just understanding. By Thursday, they'd exchanged numbers on Spotify and created a shared playlist called Coffee Shop Casualties. Kale added folk songs with guitar finger-picking that reminded Lais of summer evenings she'd never experienced. She contributed indie tracks with female voices that sounded like secrets whispered in empty rooms. Friday afternoon found Lais eating lunch alone in the office break room, scrolling through their messages while picking at a sad sandwich. Her co-worker, Nia, slid into the chair across from her, a woman in her 30s with natural hair styled in elegant twists and eyes that missed nothing. "I have been different this week," Nia observed, unwrapping a container of leftover curry that smelled like home cooking. "Less grey around the edges." "Grey around the edges?" Lais looked up from her phone. "Honey, when I first saw you, you looked like someone had drained all the color out of your world. This week there's been little sparks, mostly when you're staring at that phone and trying not to smile." Heat crept up Lai's neck. "It's nothing, just made a friend." The kind of friend who has you checking your phone every 30 seconds. Nia's smile was knowing but kind. "Good for you, baby. We all need someone who makes us remember what smiling feels like." That evening, as Lais waited for the bus home, her phone buzzed with a message from Kyle. Random question. "What's the best meal you've ever had?" She thought about elaborate restaurant dishes she'd seen on Instagram, fancy brunches that cost more than her daily food budget. Then she remembered being 12, sick with the flu, and her grandmother making grilled cheese and tomato soup from a can, cutting the sandwich into perfect triangles and sitting beside her bed until she fell asleep. "Grilled cheese and canned soup when I was sick. My grandmother made it taste like love. That's beautiful. Mine was gas station nachos at 2 a.m. after my first open mic. I was terrified I'd bombed, but this older musician told me I had something real. Those plastic cheese nachos tasted like possibility." Their conversation continued on the bus ride home, through dinner, instant ramen for her, leftover pizza for him, and into the quiet hours when the city settled into its nighttime rhythm. They talked about childhood fears and adult anxieties, about the weight of other people's expectations and the loneliness of trying to figure out who you're supposed to be. "Can I tell you something?" Lais typed at 1:23 a.m., lying in her narrow bed while Destiny's TV blared through the walls. "Always. I was scared to text you, not because you seem scary, but because, when was the last time something good happened to me? I keep waiting for the catch." The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times before his response came. "I get that. Sometimes good things feel dangerous when you're used to disappointment. But maybe we both deserve something that doesn't hurt." Lais stared at those words until they blurred. Maybe they both deserved something that didn't hurt. When was the last time she'd considered what she deserved, rather than what she could survive? "Want to meet for real coffee this weekend?" she typed before she could lose her nerve. "I promise to keep my hands steady this time. I'll bring a change of clothes, just to be safe." As she finally drifted off to sleep, Lais's phone glowed softly beside her pillow, their playlist painting the darkness with quiet melodies of hope. But she had no idea that Saturday would bring a revelation that would shake the foundation of everything she thought she knew about herself. The most dangerous thing about walls is how good they feel when someone finally convinces you to let them down. Saturday arrived with the kind of gentle sunshine that made Atlanta feel almost magical. Lias changed her outfit 3 times before settling on jeans and a soft yellow sweater that Nia had convinced her to buy last month. "Colors matter, honey," Nia had said. "They tell the world you're still fighting." They met at Piedmont Park, where families spread blankets on grass that was finally turning green after a harsh winter. Kyle was already there when she arrived, guitar case slung across his shoulder, looking effortlessly at ease in a way that made her slightly envious. His hair caught the afternoon light, and when he smiled at her approach, something warm unfurled in her chest. "How you came?" he said, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. "You sound like you thought I'd bail. I hoped you wouldn't. There's a difference." He gestured toward a large oak tree with shade that dappled the ground in shifting patterns. "I brought provisions." The provisions turned out to be gas station sandwiches, 2 bottles of sweet tea, and a bag of those ridiculously orange cheese crackers that tasted like childhood. They settled against the tree trunk, and Lias found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. "This is perfect," she said, unwrapping her sandwich. "I can't remember the last time I had a picnic." "Really? When I was growing up, my mom used to pack these elaborate lunches for me and my brother, sandwiches cut into shapes, homemade cookies, the whole thing." Kyle's expression grew distant. "She died when I was 20. Cancer. That's actually why I moved here. Couldn't stay in the house anymore." The admission hung between them like a delicate thing that might shatter if touched wrong. Lias felt her own walls shifting, recognizing the trust he'd just offered. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That must have been devastating." "It was. Still is some days. My brother Malik deals with it differently. He throws himself into work, becomes this corporate success story. Me, I apparently run away and try to make strangers cry with folk songs." Despite the sadness in his words, Lias found herself smiling. "Is that your artistic mission statement?" "Work in progress." Kyle pulled his guitar from its case, fingers automatically finding familiar chords. "What about you? What's your story with family?" The question she'd been dreading. Lias picked at the label on her sweet tea bottle, buying time. Around them, children played on swings while their parents scrolled through phones, and somewhere a dog barked at nothing in particular. "My mom and I, we don't understand each other. She thinks feelings are something you get over, like a cold. When I was diagnosed with depression, she asked what I had to be depressed about, as if sadness was a luxury I couldn't afford." The words came easier than expected, maybe because Kyle's hands continued their gentle movement across guitar strings, creating a soundtrack that made honesty feel safer. "She wanted me to be grateful for what I had instead of sad about what I didn't. But sometimes your brain just betrays you, you know. It tells you you're worthless even when logic says otherwise." "God, yes." Kyle's fingers stilled on the strings. "The number of times people have told me to just think positive or focus on the good things, as if depression is a choice we make because we enjoy being miserable." Something loosened in Lias's chest, the relief of being understood without explanation. She watched his hands resume their movement, creating melodies that seemed to capture exactly how she felt when words weren't enough. "Will you play something?" she asked. "Something that sounds like this moment." Kyle's fingers found a gentle progression, something soft and hopeful with underlying complexity. He began to sing, his voice rough around the edges, but honest in a way that made her think of old wooden floors and morning coffee, and the feeling of finally exhaling after holding your breath too long. "Found you in the wreckage of my ordinary day, coffee stains and cracked phone screens. But your smile stayed. Maybe broken things can still be beautiful. Maybe lost souls find each other when they need to." The song was clearly improvised, born from this moment, this tree, this unexpected connection between two people who'd learned to expect disappointment. When he finished, the silence felt full rather than empty. "That was beautiful," Lias whispered. "That was you," he said simply. "You're the song I didn't know I needed to write." The words hit her like gentle lightning. When was the last time someone had seen her as inspiration rather than burden? When had anyone ever made her feel like she was worth writing about? Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. 3 weeks in Lace. 3 weeks since you've called. I know you're angry, but this silence is killing me." The spell broke. Reality crashed back. Responsibilities. Guilt. The weight of expectations she'd tried to leave behind. Kyle must have seen her expression change because his hand found hers. Warm and steady. "Whatever that was, you don't have to deal with it alone anymore," he said. The words were meant to comfort, but they terrified her, because wanting someone to stay was the first step toward being devastated when they inevitably left. But as she looked into his honey-colored eyes, Lais realized she was already in too deep to protect herself from the fall. Sometimes the phone rings at exactly the wrong moment, bringing voices you've been running from. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday, jarring Lais from the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months. Her phone vibrated against the nightstand, the screen illuminating her small room with harsh blue light. Through the thin walls, she could hear Destiny's television still blaring some late-night reality show. "Lisa, baby, please don't hang up." Her mother's voice sounded smaller than she remembered, fragile in a way that made Lay's chest tighten with unwanted concern. She'd been avoiding these calls for 3 weeks, watching her mother's name flash across her cracked screen before declining and returning to whatever distraction she could find. "Mom, it's 2 in the morning. I know, I couldn't sleep. The house feels so empty since you left, and I keep thinking about our last conversation." Her mother's voice broke slightly. "Honey, I said things I didn't mean. I was scared." Lais sat up in bed, pulling her knees to her chest. Outside her window, Atlanta hummed with the quiet energy of a city that never fully slept. Distant sirens, the occasional car, someone's music playing too loud in the apartment complex parking lot. "Scared of what?" The words came out harder than intended. "Of losing you completely, of not knowing how to help you when you were hurting so much. Your depression. I didn't understand it then, and I'm still trying to understand it now." The admission surprised Lais. Her mother had always been the type to barrel forward with solutions rather than acknowledge problems. Hearing her admit uncertainty felt like watching a small crack appear in a wall she'd thought was solid stone. "I needed you to listen, not fix me," Lais said quietly. "Every time I tried to explain how I felt, you'd tell me to count my blessings or think positive thoughts, as if gratitude could cure a chemical imbalance." "I know. God, Lais, I know I messed up. I thought if I could just get you to see all the good things in your life, the sadness would go away. I didn't understand that it doesn't work like that." Tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally spilled over. Her mother's voice carried the weight of someone who'd been doing her own painful learning, and despite everything, Lais found herself missing the woman who used to braid her hair and make pancakes shaped like hearts on Sunday mornings. "I'm seeing someone," her mother continued, "a therapist, trying to understand depression better, understand you better. She says I need to stop trying to fix everything and just be present." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, circling around old wounds with careful words. They didn't solve anything. 3 weeks of silence and years of misunderstanding couldn't be healed in one late-night phone call, but something shifted. A door that had been slammed shut cracked open just enough to let in a sliver of light. When Lais finally hung up, she found herself texting Cale despite the late hour. "Are you awake? Just had the strangest conversation with my mum." His response came within minutes. "Always awake around this time. Want to talk about it?" They texted until dawn, Lais curled under her thin blanket, while Cale apparently sat in his own small apartment across the city. He told her about his complicated relationship with his brother Malik, how grief had driven them apart when it should have brought them closer. She shared pieces of her childhood, the weight of being the sensitive kid in a family that valued strength, the loneliness of feeling like an alien in her own home. "Maybe our families love us the only way they know how," Kyle wrote, "even when it's not the way we need them to." "That's very wise for 4 a.m., she replied. "I'm full of profound insights when I'm sleep-deprived. Ask me about the meaning of life." "What's the meaning of life?" "Coffee, and maybe finding someone who gets your weird sense of humor." Despite everything, Lais found herself smiling in the darkness. This was what she'd been missing, someone who could make her laugh even when her world felt upside down, who didn't try to fix her sadness but simply sat with her in it. Thursday at work passed in a haze of exhaustion and distraction. Mr. Richardson made pointed comments about her lack of focus, but even his disapproval couldn't penetrate the strange mix of emotions swirling through her. During lunch, Nia took one look at her face and dragged her to the small break room. "Spill," Nia commanded, settling across from her with a container of leftover jambalaya that made the whole room smell like home cooking. Lais found herself telling Nia everything. The late-night call, her mother's surprising vulnerability, the hours of texting with Kyle that had left her feeling raw and hopeful in equal measure. "Sounds like growth all around," Nia said thoughtfully. "Your mama's trying, you're trying, and this boy of yours is helping you remember that it's okay to let people in." "He's not my boy," Lais protested weakly. "Honey, When someone will stay up all night just to listen to you work through your feelings, that's your person. The question is, what are you going to do about it? That evening, Kyle surprised her with an invitation. Want to come to my place for dinner? Fair warning, by dinner I mean pasta with whatever I can find in my kitchen, and by place I mean a studio apartment that's roughly the size of a shoebox. Sounds perfect, she replied before she could overthink it. As she stood at the bus stop, watching Atlanta's evening rush hour unfold around her, Lace realized something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time in months, she was choosing hope over fear. But she had no idea that walking into Cale's small apartment would force her to confront the biggest question of all. What did she actually want from this fragile, beautiful thing growing between them? The most intimate moments happen in the smallest spaces, between the simplest words. Kyle's apartment was exactly as advertised, a shoebox with dreams. The entire space could have fit inside Laius's childhood bedroom, but somehow it felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived in years. String lights hung along one wall, casting warm shadows over a futon that doubled as both couch and bed, a small table that served as desk, dining room, and guitar repair station, and a kitchen that was basically a hot plate and a mini fridge with personality. "Welcome to my palace," Kyle said, setting down his delivery bag and kicking off worn sneakers. Fair warning, the neighbor upstairs practices tap dancing at random hours, and the guy next door has very loud phone conversations with someone named Brenda about their relationship drama. "It's perfect," Laius said, and meant it. The space was lived in but clean, cluttered with the kind of things that mattered. Books with cracked spines, a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest musician," photographs taped to the wall of people who looked like they'd been caught mid-laugh. "That's my family," Kyle noticed her looking at the photos. "Back when we all still talked regularly." There was one picture that drew her attention. A younger Cale with his arm around a man who shared his eyes but wore them differently, more guarded. Both of them were grinning at something outside the frame, and the love between them was visible even in the faded colors. "That's Malik," Cale said quietly. "This was taken right before I left for Atlanta. We haven't talked much since Mom died. He thinks I'm wasting my life chasing impossible dreams." "Are you?" The question slipped out before Lais could stop it. Kyle paused, a box of spaghetti halfway out of a cabinet that looked like it might fall off its hinges. "Some days, I think so. Other days, I think the only thing worse than chasing an impossible dream is giving up on it completely." He moved around the tiny kitchen with practiced efficiency, somehow managing to cook pasta, heat-jarred marinara sauce, and toast bread in a space barely larger than a closet. Lais perched on his futon, watching him work and feeling something she hadn't experienced in months: contentment. Not happiness exactly, but the absence of the constant low-level anxiety that had become her baseline. "Can I ask you something?" she said, as he handed her a mismatched plate piled with spaghetti. "When did you know you wanted to do music? Like, really know?" Kyle settled beside her, close enough that she could smell his soap, something simple and clean that reminded her of Sunday mornings. "I was 16. My mum was going through chemo, and she couldn't sleep because of the pain. So I'd sit by her bed and play guitar until she drifted off. One night, she told me that my music was the only thing that could quiet her mind." He twirled spaghetti around his fork, with the concentration of someone buying time before continuing. "She died 2 years later, but that feeling, knowing I could create something that brought peace to someone I loved, I've been chasing it ever since." "That's beautiful," Laius whispered. "It's also terrifying, because what if I never find it again? What if that was my one moment of actually mattering, and I'm just too stubborn to accept it?" The vulnerability in his voice made her chest tight. Here was someone who understood the weight of carrying other people's expectations alongside your own dreams, who knew what it felt like to wonder if you were enough. "You matter to me," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "This," she gestured between them, at the tiny apartment, at the simple meal they were sharing, "this matters." Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down that she hadn't even realized was there. "You scare me," he admitted. "I scare you. You make me want things I've convinced myself I can't have. Stability, someone to come home to, the kind of love that doesn't run away when things get hard." He set down his fork, turning to face her fully. "I've been alone for so long that I forgot what it felt like to want to share my life with someone." Lais felt her breath catch. They were venturing into territory she'd been avoiding, the space between friendship and something deeper, where words carried weight and silence meant everything. "I'm not good at this," she said quietly. "Relationships. I mean, I have a tendency to disappear when things get real, to convince myself that people are better off without my baggage. What if I want your baggage? Cale's hand found hers, fingers interlacing with surprising ease. What if I want all of it? The 2 a.m. phone calls with your mum, the bad days when you can't get out of bed, the way you overthink text messages before sending them. How do you know about the text messages? Because you do this thing where you start typing and then stop. I can see the dots appear and disappear on my phone. It's adorable. Heat crept up her neck. That's embarrassing. That's human. We all want to say the right thing, especially to people who matter. The word matter hung between them, heavy with implication. Outside, Atlanta's evening symphony played, car horns, distant music, the rumble of the MARTA train, carrying people to their real lives. But inside this small apartment, with string lights casting everything in warm gold, Lies felt like maybe she was already living her real life. I should probably head home, she said, though she made no move to leave. Destiny gets weird when I'm out too late, like I'm abandoning our non-existent friendship. Or, Kyle said carefully, you could stay. I mean, just to hang out. We could watch something terrible on my laptop and you could judge my limited tea selection. The offer was casual, but his eyes held a question that went deeper. Stay. Trust this. Let someone take care of you for once. As Lias looked around his tiny apartment, at the photos of people who loved him, at the guitar that held his dreams, at the man who was offering her something she'd never dared to want, she realized that sometimes the biggest risks come disguised as the simplest choices. The morning after you let someone in is when you discover if they're planning to stay. Lias woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the distant sound of someone practicing scales on a piano. For a moment, disorientation clouded her thoughts. This wasn't her cramped room with its view of a brick wall, and the mattress beneath her was softer than the thin foam she'd grown accustomed to. Then she remembered Cale's apartment. They'd fallen asleep, watching an old romantic comedy on his laptop, her head finding its way to his shoulder somewhere around the second act. She was still wearing yesterday's clothes, covered by a soft blanket that smelled like fabric softener, and something uniquely him. Kyle sat at his small table, guitar in his lap, fingers moving quietly across the strings. He was trying to play softly, she realized, trying not to wake her. The consideration of it made her chest warm. "Good morning," she said, voice rough with sleep. He looked up, and his smile was like sunrise, slow, gentle, transformative. "Hey, I was starting to think you might sleep all day. How do you feel?" How did she feel? Different. Lighter, maybe. Like some weight she'd been carrying had been set down without her noticing. "Good. Really good, actually." "Coffee?" He gestured toward a French press that looked older than both of them combined. "Fair warning, it's strong enough to wake the dead." "Perfect." As he poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs, Lies checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Destiny, and a text that read, "Where are you? Your bed wasn't slept in and I was about to call the police or something." "Roommate drama?" Kyle asked, noticing her expression. "She's just dramatic. I should probably head home soon and assure her I wasn't kidnapped." Lice accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "This is incredible. Where did you learn to make coffee like this?" "YouTube University." Also, desperation. When you can't afford good coffee shops, you learn to make magic happen at home. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee while Atlanta woke up around them. Through the thin walls, she could hear the tap dancer upstairs beginning their morning routine and someone's alarm going off repeatedly next door. It should have been chaotic, but somehow the symphony of other people's lives felt comforting rather than intrusive. "I need to tell you something," Kyle said suddenly, setting down his mug. "Last night, having you here, waking up and seeing you still there, it felt like something I could get used to." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Lies felt her heart speed up. That familiar flutter of panic when something good threatened to become real. "Kyle, I know it's fast," he continued, as if he could sense her retreat beginning. "I know we barely know each other, and I know you're dealing with your own stuff, but I also know that I haven't felt this connected to another person in years." Lies stared into her coffee cup, watching the surface ripple slightly with her breathing. Everything in her wanted to run, to make excuses, create distance, protect herself from the inevitable disappointment. But something stronger held her in place, the memory of falling asleep feeling safe for the first time in months. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Of what?" "Of this. Of wanting something this much. Of letting myself hope that maybe..." She trailed off. unable to finish the thought. Maybe what? Maybe I deserve something good for once. Kyle reached across the small space between them, cupping her face gently in his hand. You deserve everything good, Lais. Every single beautiful thing this world has to offer. Tears threatened, but they were different from the ones she'd grown accustomed to, not born from sadness or frustration, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen clearly and accepted completely. Her phone buzzed with another text from Destiny. Seriously, where are you? The moment broke, reality creeping back in. Lais pulled back reluctantly, already missing the warmth of his touch. I really should go, she said, though every part of her wanted to stay in this tiny apartment where the world felt manageable and hope seemed possible. I know. Kyle stood, moving to grab a hoodie from a hook by the door. Let me walk you to the bus stop. You don't have to. I want to. They gathered her things in comfortable silence, and Kyle tucked his guitar back into its case. As they prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Lies? Last night wasn't just about being lonely, was it? I mean, for either of us. She met his eyes, seeing her own hope reflected there. No, it wasn't. Good, because I'd like to do it again. The dinner, the talking, the falling asleep watching terrible movies, all of it. Outside, Atlanta buzzed with Saturday morning energy. Joggers claimed the sidewalks. Families headed toward the park with strollers and soccer balls, and the smell of bacon drifted from a nearby diner. They walked slowly, neither wanting to rush toward goodbye. At the bus stop, Kyle pulled out his phone. There's something I want to show you. A music festival happening next month. Local acts. Very small, very low-key. I'm thinking about signing up to play. That's amazing. You should definitely do it. Would you? Would you want to come? If I get accepted? The question was casual, but Lais could hear the weight behind it. He was asking for more than just her presence at a show. He was asking her to be part of his dreams, to invest in a future that included both of them. Yes, she said, surprising herself with how quickly the answer came. I'd love to. When the bus arrived, Kyle kissed her forehead gently, a gesture so tender it made her knees weak. As she found a seat by the window, she watched him wave goodbye, hands shoved deep in his pockets, hair catching the morning light. For the first time in her adult life, Lais found herself looking forward to Monday, not because work had suddenly become bearable, but because it meant another week of text messages and shared playlists and the possibility of more nights like last night. But as the bus carried her back toward her real life, she had no idea that everything was about to change, and that sometimes the biggest challenges come disguised as phone calls you're not ready to answer. Sometimes life waits until you're finally happy to remind you how fragile happiness really is. The call came on a Tuesday that had started like any other. Lais was sorting through invoices at her desk, half listening to Mr. Richardson complain about quarterly projections, when her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. Unknown numbers usually meant bill collectors or robocalls, but something made her answer. Lais Ellis. Yes. This is Dr. Patricia Moreau from Grady Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about your mother, Carmen Ellis. She's been admitted, and you're listed as her emergency contact. The world tilted sideways. The invoices scattered from Lace's hands as she gripped her phone tighter, Mr. Richardson's voice fading into background noise. What happened? Is she okay? She had what appears to be a minor heart attack. She's stable now, but she's been asking for you. Can you come in? Lais was already grabbing her purse, mumbling something to Mr. Richardson about a family emergency. The bus ride to the hospital felt eternal, every red light and slow passenger adding weight to the panic building in her chest. She kept thinking about their last conversation, the late-night call where her mother had sounded smaller, more vulnerable than ever before. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and anxiety. Lais found her mother in a small room on the cardiac floor, looking tiny against the white sheets, monitors beeping softly around her. Carmen Ellis had always seemed larger than life to her daughter, the woman who worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, who never showed weakness, who approached problems like enemies to be defeated. Seeing her like this, fragile and pale, shattered something in Lais's chest. Baby, her mother whispered, reaching out with a hand that trembled slightly. You came. Of course I came. Lais took her mother's hand, surprised by how cold it felt. What happened? The doctor said it was your heart. Stress, they think? Work, money, worry about you? Carmen's voice was hoarse, worn thin. The doctor says I need to make changes. Slow down. Take better care of myself. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken years settling between them. Finally, Carmen spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about needing me to listen instead of trying to fix everything, about your depression. Mum, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. I've spent so much time being angry at your sadness that I forgot to ask why you were hurting. I thought if I could just make you grateful enough, strong enough, you'd stop being depressed. But that's not how it works, is it?" Tears Liz had been holding back finally spilled over. "No, it's not. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry for making you feel like your feelings were wrong." They talked for hours, about depression, about family expectations, about the weight of trying to be strong all the time. It wasn't a magic cure, but it was a beginning. When visiting hours ended, Liz promised to come back the next day. On the bus home, she texted Cale, "At the hospital. Mom had a heart attack. She's okay, but I don't know how to process this." His response came immediately. "On my way, what hospital? You don't have to come. I'm headed home now. I want to be there. Where should I meet you?" Something in her chest loosened at his words. When was the last time someone had dropped everything just to be present for her pain? They met at a 24-hour diner near her apartment, one of those places that existed in the liminal space between late night and early morning. Cale was already there when she arrived, 2 cups of coffee cooling on a worn Formica table. He stood when he saw her, and without a word, pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home. "How is she?" he asked once they'd settled into the cracked vinyl booth. Liz told him everything. The phone call, the hospital, the conversation with her mother that had cracked open years of misunderstanding. Cale listened without trying to fix or minimize, just held space for her complex emotions. "I feel guilty," she admitted, stirring sugar into coffee she didn't really want. For being relieved that she finally understands, for being angry that it took a heart attack for her to listen, for wanting to forgive her and also wanting to stay mad. "All of that makes sense," Cale said quietly. "Grief isn't just about death. Sometimes it's about mourning the relationship you wish you'd had while figuring out how to build the one you actually want." His phone buzzed, and Liz saw his expression change as he read the message. A shadow crossed his face, the same look he got when talking about his brother, Malik. "Everything okay?" Kyle set his phone down carefully, like it might explode. "That was Theo. You remember, my friend who's been helping me organize the festival audition? The one I told you about?" "Yeah, I got accepted. I'm playing next Saturday night." He should have sounded excited, but his voice was flat, almost resigned. "That's amazing. Kyle, this is what you've been working toward. The same weekend you need to be with your mum. The same weekend your family is falling apart and you need support." He ran his hands through his hair. "The timing is terrible." Liz felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Guys, what are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe I should cancel. Your mom is more important than some small-time festival where probably 12 people will show up." "Don't—" The word came out sharper than intended. "Don't you dare cancel your dreams for me. But I need you to trust that I can handle this. I need you to believe that I'm strong enough to support your dreams, even when my life is complicated." Liz reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "This is your chance, Kyle. You can't pass it up." They argued quietly for another hour, both trying to do the right thing, both terrified of making the wrong choice. Finally, Kyle agreed to keep the gig, but the joy had been leached out of it. What should have been a celebration felt like another complication in lives that were already too complicated. Walking to the bus stop, Liz felt the familiar weight of depression settling back over her shoulders like an old coat. For a few weeks, she'd almost forgotten how heavy it could be. Now with her mother in the hospital, and Cale preparing for the biggest opportunity of his career, she felt the old urge to disappear, to make herself smaller, so she wouldn't be a burden on anyone else's happiness. As she watched Cale's worried face in the fluorescent diner light, Liz realized that loving someone meant learning to carry both joy and sorrow at the same time, and she wasn't sure she was strong enough for either. The week before everything changes is when you discover what you're really made of. The days following her mother's heart attack blurred together like watercolors in rain. Liz found herself living in a strange, liminal space, splitting time between the hospital's sterile corridors and her cramped apartment, between supporting her mother's recovery and trying to maintain some semblance of normal life. Sleep came in fragments, and food tasted like cardboard. Mr. Richardson had been surprisingly understanding about her need for flexible hours, though his version of compassion involved pointed comments about maintaining professional standards during personal crises. Nia picked up the slack without being asked, covering phones when Lais disappeared for long lunch breaks at the hospital. "You look like hell, honey," Nia said Thursday afternoon, sliding a container of homemade soup across Lais's desk. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't from a vending machine?" "I'm fine," Lais lied, stirring the soup without really tasting it. Her mother was doing better, stable, talking about discharge plans, even making jokes with the nurses. But the scare had shaken something loose in Lais that she couldn't quite name. "And how's your musician boy handling all this?" That was the question Lais had been avoiding. Cale had been nothing but supportive, texting throughout the day, bringing her coffee at the hospital, listening to her process the same anxieties over and over, but she could see the strain in his face, the way he kept checking his phone for updates from Theo about the festival, the careful way he avoided mentioning Saturday night's performance unless she brought it up first. "He's being amazing," she said, which was true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that she felt like she was drowning him in her crisis, pulling him under just when he needed to soar. That evening, she sat beside her mother's hospital bed while Carmen dozed fitfully. The monitors had become background music, steady beeps that marked time in a place where time felt suspended. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kyle. "How's she doing today?" "Better. Doctors think she can go home Monday." "That's great news. How are you doing?" Such a simple question, but it made tears spring to her eyes. How was she doing? She was terrified of losing her mother, just when they'd started to understand each other. She was exhausted from shuttling between worlds. She was scared that her depression was seeping back in, coloring everything grey despite the genuine progress with her mom, and she was terrified that she was becoming exactly the kind of burden she'd always feared being. "I'm okay. Are you ready for Saturday?" "As ready as I can be. Theo thinks there might be some industry people there. Small time, but still." Even through text, she could feel his excitement, carefully contained out of respect for her situation. This was his moment, the opportunity he'd been working toward since moving to Atlanta, and she was making it about her problems. "I'm so proud of you," she typed. "You're going to be incredible. I wish you could be there." The words hit her like a physical blow. Of course he wished she could be there. This was his dream, and she was supposed to be the person cheering him on from the front row. Instead, she'd become the complicated girlfriend whose family drama took precedence over everything else. Friday brought discharge papers and the complicated logistics of getting her mother settled back home. The 3-hour drive to rural Georgia felt eternal. Carmen dozing in the passenger seat, while Lais navigated back roads she'd hoped never to see again. Her childhood home looked smaller than she remembered, more weathered, like it had aged years in the month since she'd left. "You don't have to stay," her mother said as Lais helped her settle on the living room couch. "I know you have that young man's concert tomorrow night. It's not a concert, it's a festival, and I'm staying until you're stable, Lais." Carmen's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent years managing crisis and responsibility. "I'm going to be fine. Mrs. Patterson next door is checking on me every few hours, and the visiting nurse comes Monday. You've done enough." "I haven't done anything. I wasn't even here when I had a heart attack that was 30 years in the making." Carmen's laugh was dry but not unkind. "Baby, this wasn't your fault, and staying here feeling guilty isn't going to fix my heart or make up for lost time." They sat in the familiar living room where Lais had spent countless childhood hours, feeling like a stranger in her own home. The silence stretched between them, but it was different now, less loaded with resentment, more pregnant with possibility. "I'm scared," Lais admitted quietly, "of leaving you alone, of going back to Atlanta and pretending everything's normal, of being happy when you're still recovering." "And I'm scared of you staying here out of obligation instead of love," Carmen replied. "We've wasted too many years being afraid of the wrong things." Her phone rang, Kyle calling, probably to check in before his show tomorrow. Lais let it go to voicemail, then immediately felt guilty for avoiding him. "Answer it," her mother said gently. "I don't know what to say to him. He's got this huge opportunity tomorrow, and I'm here dealing with family drama. He's being supportive, but I can see that I'm holding him back. Or maybe you're scared that if you let yourself be happy for him, you'll have to admit that good things can happen even when life is complicated." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Was that what she was doing? Using her mother's crisis as an excuse to retreat back into the familiar territory of martyrdom and self-denial. Her phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Against her better judgment, she played it on speaker. "Hey, it's me. I know you're dealing with a lot right now, but I wanted you to hear this before tomorrow night. Whatever happens at the festival, win or lose, you've already changed everything for me. You made me remember why I wanted to make music in the first place, to connect with people, to make them feel less alone. That's what you do just by existing, Lies. You make people feel less alone. A pause, the sound of him breathing. I love you. I needed to say that, even if the timing is terrible. I love you and I believe in us, and I hope you believe in us too. The message ended, leaving silence that felt heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. Carmen was watching her daughter's face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read emotional weather patterns. That boy loves you. I know. Do you love him? The question she'd been avoiding for weeks, maybe longer. Did she love Cale? Yes. Desperately, terrifyingly, completely. Did she trust herself to love him without destroying what they'd built? That was the question that kept her awake at night. I love him so much it scares me, she whispered. And as the words left her lips, Lias realized that tomorrow would demand the biggest decision of her life, whether to run toward love or away from it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show up, even when you're terrified of what showing up might cost you. Saturday evening found Leia sitting in her rental car outside the Riverside Community Center, watching people stream through the doors, carrying folding chairs and homemade signs supporting local bands. The drive from Georgia had taken 4 hours. 4 hours of arguing with herself, of pulling over twice to turn around, of her mother's voice echoing in her head. Stop being afraid of the wrong things. Through the windows, she could see the warm glow of string lights and hear the distant sound of a guitar being tuned. Cale was in there somewhere, probably pacing behind the small stage, running through lyrics in his head, wondering if she'd kept her word about believing in them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nia. Girl, you better be at that boy's show, or I'm driving to Georgia myself to drag you back. Another from her mother. Go be happy, baby. You've got my permission. Lias laughed despite her nerves, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. When had she become the kind of person who needed permission to choose joy? The community center lobby buzzed with small-town energy, families claiming seats, teenagers clustering around the merch table, older folks greeting each other like old friends. It felt intimate and genuine in a way that made Lias's chest tight with something that might have been hope. She found Theo near the backstage area, a tall guy with kind eyes and nervous energy, checking items off a clipboard. He looked up when she approached, his face breaking into a surprised grin. You must be Lice. Kyle's been checking his phone every 30 seconds all day. Is he? Terrified? Excited? Probably about to throw up? The usual pre-show cocktail. Theo's expression grew more serious. He didn't think you were coming, said you had family stuff to deal with. I did. I do. But she looked toward the stage where someone was doing a final sound check. Some things are more important than perfect timing. Theo's smile was understanding. He goes on in about 20 minutes. Third act. You want me to tell him you're here? Lias shook her head. I want to surprise him. She found a seat toward the back, close enough to see everything but far enough away to process her emotions without being seen. The first 2 acts were good. A folk duo with tight harmonies and a solo singer-songwriter whose lyrics made the audience lean forward in recognition. But when Kyle walked onto the small stage, guitar case slung over his shoulder, something in the room shifted. He looked different up there, more himself somehow. The nervous energy that usually surrounded him had transformed into something focused and powerful. He adjusted the microphone, scanned the audience, and for a moment, his eyes found hers across the dimly lit room. The surprise on his face was worth every mile of the drive from Georgia. Good evening, he said into the microphone, his voice steady despite what she knew must be racing emotions. I'm Cale Sumner, and I want to start by saying that the most important person in my world just reminded me that sometimes love means showing up, even when it's inconvenient. Heat crept up Lia's neck as people around her murmured appreciatively. A few heads turned in her direction, but she barely noticed. She was too focused on the man on stage who was looking at her like she'd just given him the greatest gift imaginable. This first song is called Coffee Stains, Kyle continued, fingers finding the opening chords. It's about how the best accidents are the ones that change your life. What followed was 15 minutes of pure magic. Kyle sang about small-town dreams and big-city loneliness, about the weight of carrying other people's expectations and the lightness of finding someone who understood your particular brand of broken. His voice was rough around the edges but honest in a way that made the audience forget they were listening to performance rather than confession. But it was the final song that broke Lias completely. She recognized the melody from that afternoon in the park, but the lyrics were new. She came with baggage and a cracked phone screen, carrying sadness like a familiar friend, but her smile could light up the darkest scenes, and her love could teach broken hearts to mend. I was lost in the noise of an ordinary day until coffee spilled and changed everything. Now I know that love isn't finding someone perfect, it's finding someone perfect for you. The applause was immediate and sustained, but Kyle's eyes never left Lias's face. When he finally stepped off the stage, she was already moving through the crowd, not caring who she bumped into or what conversation she interrupted. They met in the middle of the room, and without hesitation, she threw her arms around his neck. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while people cheered and whistled around them. "You came," he whispered against her ear. "I almost didn't. I spent the whole week convinced I was holding you back, that my problems were too big, that I didn't deserve." "Hey," he set her down, cupping her face in his hands. "Look at me. You deserve everything beautiful this world has to offer, but more than that, you make everything beautiful. Did you hear what happened out there? You were incredible. I was real. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing or pretending or trying to be what I thought people wanted. I was just me. And that's because of you. Because you taught me that being enough exactly as I am is possible." Around them, the crowd was thinning as people headed toward the parking lot, but Theo appeared at Kyle's shoulder with news that made both of their hearts stop. "There was a talent scout here tonight," he said, barely containing his excitement, "from a management company in Nashville. She wants to talk to you about representation." The words hung in the air like a promise and a question mark. Nashville, professional representation, everything Kyle had been working toward, now within reach. "That's incredible," Lies said, and meant it, even as fear tried to claw its way up her throat. "Kyle, this is your dream." "It's one dream," he said carefully, his hands still framing her face. "But I've got another dream standing right in front of me. You can't choose me over your career. I'm not choosing you over anything. I'm choosing us. Whatever comes next, we figure it out together. Nashville, Atlanta, the moon. I don't care where we end up as long as we end up there together." The talent scout approached then, a woman in her 40s with shrewd eyes and a genuine smile, and for the next hour, Lice watched Kyle navigate the kind of conversation that could change his life. She stayed close but let him lead, offering silent support while he discussed possibilities and timelines and the delicate balance between artistic integrity and commercial viability. When they finally walked out of the community center together, the Georgia night air was thick with summer humidity and the sound of crickets. Kyle's guitar case bumped against his leg with each step, and Lias's hand was warm in his. "So," she said, as they reached her rental car. "Nashville, huh? Maybe. Probably. It would mean leaving Atlanta, starting over again." "I'm good at starting over," Lias said quietly. "And maybe it's time I stopped running from good things." Kyle stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I'm terrified and excited and completely unprepared for any of this. But I'm also saying yes. Yes to Nashville. Yes to starting over. Yes to figuring out what our life looks like when we build it together." His kiss tasted like possibility and promises they were finally brave enough to make. As they stood in the parking lot of a small-town community center, holding each other under a canopy of stars, Lias realized that love wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about finding someone who inspired you to complete yourself. 2 years later, love isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of someone who chooses to struggle alongside you. The Nashville apartment was smaller than their place in Atlanta had been, but it felt like home in ways that square footage couldn't measure. Sunlight streamed through windows that faced east, catching the dust motes that danced above Kyle's guitar case, now one of 3, thanks to the modest success of his debut EP. The walls were covered with a mixture of his tour posters and printouts of Lice's blog posts, the ones that had started as a way to process her depression and grown into something that helped thousands of other people feel less alone. Lice sat at her laptop at their small dining table, responding to comments on her latest post about navigating anxiety during major life changes. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from her mother, not the panicked kind from 2 years ago, but the excited kind that came when Carmen Ellis had news to share and couldn't wait for their weekly Sunday call. She finally said yes, her mother's voicemail revealed, laughter bubbling through the phone speaker. "Mr. Patterson proposed last night, and I said yes. At 72. Can you believe it? I wanted you to be the first to know. Kyle looked up from the kitchen where he was making coffee. Still the same elaborate French press ritual, though now he could afford the good beans. Your mum's getting married. Apparently finding love at any age runs in the family. Lais grinned, already dialing her mother back. The conversation that followed was everything their relationship had become, warm, honest, occasionally frustrating, but always rooted in genuine affection. Carmen's heart attack had been the crisis that forced them both to choose healing over being right, and the 2 years since had been a slow, steady process of building something new from the foundation of who they really were, rather than who they'd expected each other to be. "We want a small ceremony," Carmen was saying. "Just family and close friends. Will you and Cale be able to make it?" "Of course. We wouldn't miss it." Lais caught Cale's eye across their tiny kitchen, sharing the smile that passed between people who'd learned that family was something you created as much as inherited. After hanging up, she found herself scrolling through her blog's comment section, something that usually felt overwhelming, but today brought unexpected joy. Her post about loving someone with depression had been shared nearly 3,000 times, and the responses were a mix of gratitude, recognition, and people sharing their own stories of finding love despite mental illness. "Thank you for writing this. My partner struggles with anxiety, and I never knew how to help without making things worse. Your words gave me language for support instead of solutions. I'm the one with depression in my relationship, and I've been so scared of being a burden. Reading about how you and your boyfriend navigate this together gives me hope that love is possible even when my brain lies to me. 2 years clean from self-harm, 6 months into therapy, and finally brave enough to let someone love me. Your blog helped me believe I deserve good things." Each comment represented someone choosing vulnerability over isolation, connection over safety. Lais still took her antidepressants every morning with her coffee, still had days when the weight of sadness felt too heavy to carry, but she'd learned that healing wasn't about becoming a different person. It was about becoming more fully herself, depression and all. "Hey," Cale said, settling beside her with 2 steaming mugs. "Earth to Lais, you've got that look." "What look?" "The look you get when you're reading comments and remembering that your words matter to people. It's a good look on you." She leaned into his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his soap mixed with coffee and the faint smell of guitar strings. Through their window, she could hear Nashville waking up, delivery trucks, morning commuters, someone practicing piano in the building next door. "Theo called while you were talking to your mum," Kyle said. "The label wants to discuss a full album. Nothing set in stone, but they're interested in the direction we've been heading." "That's incredible. You must be cautiously optimistic," he finished. "I learned that phrase from you." It was true. Success in Nashville had come slowly, built on late-night gigs and streaming numbers that grew steadily rather than exploded overnight. Cale's music had found its audience, people who appreciated honesty over polish, stories over hooks. He played smaller venues than he'd once dreamed of, but the connection with his audience was deeper, more genuine. "There's something else," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Joe, I know we talked about doing things our own way, about not following other people's timelines." Lais's heart stuttered as he pulled out a small velvet box, worn around the edges like it had been carried for a while. "I don't need a big proposal or a perfect moment," he continued, opening the box to reveal a simple silver band with a small diamond that caught the morning light. "I just need you to know that every day I choose you feels like the easiest decision I've ever made." The ring was perfect, understated but thoughtful, classic but uniquely them. Lais found herself crying, not from sadness for once, but from the overwhelming recognition of being completely known and loved anyway. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, obviously yes." As Kyle slipped the ring onto her finger, Lais thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that coffee shop accident to this moment in their Nashville kitchen, surrounded by the ordinary magic of a life they'd built together. It hadn't been easy. There had been arguments about money and career decisions, days when her depression made her difficult to live with, nights when his anxiety about the music industry kept them both awake. But they'd learned to fight fair, to support each other's dreams even when those dreams felt incompatible with security, to love each other through the difficult seasons as well as the joyful ones. Later that evening, they sat on their small balcony sharing takeout pad thai and planning their future. The conversation meandered from wedding details to career goals to the possibility of adopting a cat, the kind of domestic dreaming that had once terrified Lais and now felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. "Can I tell you something?" she said as the Nashville skyline glittered in the distance. Always. 2 years ago, when I was getting on that bus to Atlanta, I thought I was running away from everything, but I was actually running toward this, toward you, toward us, toward a life where being sad sometimes doesn't disqualify me from being happy most of the time. Kyle's hand found hers, his thumb tracing the new ring that caught streetlight and starlight in equal measure. "We're going to have a beautiful life," he said quietly. "Not perfect, but beautiful. Real." As they sat together in the warm Nashville evening, surrounded by the sounds of a city full of dreamers, Liz realized that love wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about finding someone who inspired you to complete yourself, one imperfect, courageous day at a time. What did you learn from Liz and Kale's story? Have you ever had to choose between running away from love and running toward it? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.